Once upon a time, in the kingdom of Rheinkal, in the barony of Bourgeois, a large crowd of over 1,000 people gathered in the square. Those present discussed how a year had already passed and marveled at how quickly time flies. Everyone was curious to know how many would be chosen this year. Two men sat in one of the establishments and discussed the upcoming event. One of them said that if it were him, he would go to the other world. The other believed that if he succeeded, he could achieve great success. His companion asked if he would really risk his life. He replied, why not? If he passed the test, he would be rid of his commoner status and become a semi-aristocrat. He could become a knight, get rich, and leave. Meanwhile, a young man in the crowd thought about how he could control the pride of the kingdom of Rheinkal with the power of God Colossus. If he passed the pilot test, he could control the giant machine. Everyone who considered himself a man had to try it at least once. Approaching the announcement, he read that the test would be held in Baron Bourgeois' square. At that moment, he overheard a conversation. One of the interlocutors asked how much blood he wanted to shed if he were to drive a giant machine. Then, the young man was struck from behind and fell to the ground. Several young men behind him told him not to stand in the way of future pilots. One of them, named Thomas, grabbed the guy by the hair and asked how he dared to walk in front of the test site, or if he wanted to go to the other world. He was immediately surprised by the smell coming from him. His friend said that perhaps he had no one to take care of him. Saying that they were late, Thomas's friends called him to come with them. He left the boy, saying that it would be better if he didn't see that ugly face before the test. After a while, the Baron, who had already tested thousands of people, said that there was not a single worthy candidate and invited the next one. Another young man who tried to pass the test failed, and the Baron said to take him away because he was terrible. He yelled at the candidates that they were terrible and talentless and asked how long they were going to continue to embarrass themselves. He urged everyone to try to lift the magic stone and become a novice pilot of a giant machine. The Baron promised to reward the winners and their families. One of the spectators, hearing this, said that the reward was ridiculous. Another said that they were trying to impress the royal family with their candidates, and that the Baron was already getting angry because it wasn't working. For the sake of the test, they even stopped the factory, and now there were no more candidates. Everyone knew that the more children failed, the more labor there would be. Then Thomas stepped forward, called the others weaklings, and told them to look at him. Many people supported him, shouting that he was the strongest and that they knew he could do it. At that moment, he thought that such an opportunity does not come often, and that this is not just a stone. Taking the magic stone in his hands, he thought that it was important and that it was his future and freedom. Putting incredible effort into lifting the stone, he thought that the peasant Thomas was no more, and now he would be Sir Thomas, Knight of the Kingdom. Seeing that he had lifted the stone to his chest, the spectators were very surprised, because this was the first time such a thing had happened. One of the girls said that it was her friend Thomas. Hearing her words about his friend, Thomas mentally told her not to be ridiculous, because now he no longer associated with the rabble. Meanwhile, the Baron, who was also watching what was happening, like the spectators, was surprised that Thomas was able to lift the stone. And Thomas, trying to lift it higher and higher, encouraged himself that this was his last chance to change his life. And finally, with one more effort, he was able to lift the magic stone above his head. Seeing this, the hooded young man mentally asked Thomas to stop and not lift the stone. And then, unexpectedly, Thomas's body was struck by energy waves, and he fell, passing away. The spectators were shocked that the stone had taken his life. Some asked to stop the test, believing that they would all go to the other world, but the Baron ordered them all to be quiet, and, reminding them that the kingdom was at war, called the next candidate. But literally a minute later, he noticed that there was no one left in the square, and he did not understand where everyone had gone. He shouted that they must have a good life, and that this was what he got for his kindness. Pointing his finger at a few people who were in horror, the Baron told them to come to him, but they said they were going to leave. Otherwise, they would end up like Thomas, and being a peasant wasn't so bad anymore. But when they approached the exit, they realized that it was blocked by the Baron's guards. While the guards forced the young men to return to the competition, the Baron said that they had a choice, either to rise up or to go to the other world. Everyone gathered again in the square, and the Baron said that those who were too weak for the test were a waste of money. Among the crowd was a young man in a hood who raised his hand. When people saw this, they began to say that he was crazy. Everyone turned and looked at him. Someone in the crowd said that this guy claimed to see ghosts and should be sent to the other world. The Baron also saw that he had raised his hand and immediately thought that he was just another poor man. The young man asked him to give him a chance. The spectators began to argue that it was not right to work all the time and that it was better to stay with his parents while they were still alive. He remembered his life, and it was rock bottom, as he himself called it. He sat in the back alleys of the city, hungry and cold. Once, he picked up some food that a drunk man passing by had thrown away and began to eat. At that moment, a young man jumped up to him and hit him, calling him a beggar who eats off the floor. His parents passed away when he was 10 years old. Since childhood, he had been haunted by strange visions and hallucinations. Neither the violence nor his hallucinations ever went away. It didn't matter whether his eyes were open or not, but he went through hell. The young man who beat him asked if he was seeing ghosts again. He told him not to come near their territory and hang out with other beggars like him. In the kingdom of Rheinkal, when a person turned 10, they received a name at a ceremony, but orphans did not undergo the ceremony, so he was called a moron. All this time, he had been waiting for today, his 19th birthday. As the young men left, they discussed why Lieutenant Davis cared about someone like him. The young man thought about the fact that it was his birthday, but no one would even congratulate him. But that was normal for him. Standing on the railing and looking at the river, he thought about freeing himself from this life. He jumped into the water, thinking that now he was finally free from all the hatred and violence, from depression and fear, and from his hated body. As he sank deeper, he mentally said goodbye to all of it, including the kingdom of Rheinkall, which had not even given him a name. There, in the depths, he was still thinking about his name when he opened his eyes because he remembered. In his past life, he was the winner of Mr. Olympia from Korea, and now he remembered it. After the competition, a reporter asked him how he felt since he was the first Asian to win this title. She asked if he had any special training and asked to touch his chest, which turned out to be very firm. He remembered that his name was Kang Go-han and that he was a Korean bodybuilder. In an interview, he said that it wasn't difficult and that you just had to do 3 exercises diligently. At that time, he won the world bodybuilding competition and had a wonderful life. He was the strongest man in the world with Korean muscles. He had a lot of TV appearances and photo shoots for magazines. His goal was to reach the highest level of natural training and become the strongest. It was enough to look at all those muscles in the reflection. Back then, he was a celebrity. Now, he couldn't believe that it was really him. He was constantly surrounded by female fans who rushed towards him because they wanted to touch his muscles. Once, he stood and looked at the largest hall in the country, and his comrades admired him. Remembering all this, Kang Ho-han thought that he took training seriously. His evening workouts were brutal and intense. As he left, he said goodbye to the employees who had worked hard. And now, he thought about how he wanted to build the best muscles possible. His goal was to win 9 Mr. Olympia titles in a row, just like Lee Haney and Rooney Koeman. He remembered how he used to race down the road. And in that life, and with those muscles, he was free. It was the feeling of being in complete control of his power, complete freedom, and a wonderful past life. And then he remembered how a truck was rushing towards him, and the collision was unavoidable. Kang Go-han woke up in horror and shouted that his past life could not end like this. At that moment, he saw the face of Lieutenant Davis in front of him, who said that he was right and that it couldn't end like that. He said that he had jumped into the river and asked if he really thought his life was worthless. At that moment, Kang Go-han didn't understand why he had saved him. The lieutenant grabbed him by his clothes and asked how he would look his father in the eye when he himself went to the other world. Kang Go-han saw tears in his eyes, but at that moment, he thought he could still see them. The memories of his past life seemed like a dream, and it ended like a dream. Looking at his hands, he wondered if he really was Kang Ho-han. He looked in the mirror while Lieutenant Davis told him not to let other people influence him, and that he had to become a man and become strong. Kang Ho-han thought that even though his past life was over, he could try again. He was thin and weak, but he was only 19. He wasn't fat, and he didn't have an ounce of muscle, but he decided that he would grow bigger and more handsome. And the hallucinations he had seen all his life turned out to be a system window. He realized that he wasn't crazy, but he had a crazy skill. Lieutenant Davis tried to distract him from the mirror, but when he saw him holding his stomach, he thought he was hungry and ran away. He returned shortly after and handed him a plate, saying it was herbal soup and he needed to regain his strength. Looking at the plate, Kang Go-han opened the nutrition information window and read about the soup. Now he understood that he hadn't understood all this time because of Hangul. But everything became clear to him as soon as he remembered his past life. He was delighted and asked Davis if the giant pilot test would take place in a month. Davis replied that it would, but asked if he was sure. Jumping up and down with joy, Kang Go-han said it was a great idea and that he himself had said he shouldn't live by other people's standards. As he ran away, he thought about how he had lived 19 terrible years, but he could still be successful if he did the same thing he did in his past life. Now he had a cheat window in the nutrition system and could become happy by building muscle. Thinking about all this, he jumped high. But after jumping, he immediately fell and, lying on the ground, remembered that he had low stamina and depression, and he would need more work than he thought. Climbing the mountain, he reasoned that he must first get rid of his depression and panic attacks. In the mountains, he found puria grass, which maintained serotonin levels in the brain. At that moment, he was 2 kilograms away from his daily serotonin requirement. Kang Go-han learns that a healthy spirit is not in the bones, and that a real bodybuilder must understand anatomy, physiology, mechanics, and nutrition. As he gathered the herb, he thought that omega-3 and protein were alternatives to antidepressants, and that he should eat everything that was edible and healthy. After starting to eat the herb he had gathered, he thought that it would be difficult to find more anyway. But he was curious to see if he could eat 2 kilograms of puria every day. He felt sick because he hadn't eaten properly for almost 19 years. But Kang Ho-han also ate like that every day. Being the best in the world wasn't easy, but working in the factory was also good exercise for him. It was hard and intense work, but he had to think of it not as a 15-hour workday, but as excellent triceps training. He threw the cart down, even though another worker shouted at him not to throw it. And he happily thought that all that was left was the reward for muscle growth. And now, during the test, he thought about how it had been a month of hard work, but he had become stronger, and hoped that it had not been in vain. Kang Ho Han climbed the stairs, and the spectators behind him did not understand what the smell was coming from him. One of the spectators picked up a bag that he had thrown away on the way, and sniffing it, decided that it was a strange smell. He thought it was the smell of urine and cursed. Kang Ho Han thought about the fact that he had used a secret method involving smelly salt with the smell of ammonia. He learns that liquid ammonia is used by powerlifters when they try to lift extreme weights. It causes the nervous system to become excited. Baron called him a weakling and told him that if he messed up, he would be responsible for his entire family and even his class, so he had to be ready. Standing in front of the magic stone, Kang Ho Han thought that he had bodybuilding skills that Thomas did not have. With all the doping, his willpower was about 11/8, which was lower than Thomas's, but he didn't use it to its full potential. He knew that using all his strength at once was a skill that could only be achieved after years of training, and he decided to use the pressure to his advantage. After all, if he was as desperate as Thomas, he would get tired just as quickly. The trick to not getting tired from incredibly difficult tasks was to make it a habit. He sat down near the stone and began to slowly lift it. The spectators laughed, not understanding what he was doing, but he understood that this was how bodybuilders maintained their vigor, by lifting maximum weights every day. They turned the stress of lifting weights into daily repetitions that their bodies had become accustomed to. Lifting the stone slightly, he thought that it was just a stone, and that it was the same thing he did every day. Deadlifting was just a routine for him, like 15 hours of work. Then he had to straighten his back, squeeze his buttocks, breathe deeply, and pull in his stomach. He convinced himself to accept it with his whole body and focus his strength. Kang Ho Han clenched his thumbs and aligned his center of gravity. He was able to lift the stone even higher. He used his weightlifting skills, bending and straightening his legs to engage his upper body. Finally, he succeeded and lifted the magic stone above his head. The crowd cheered that he had done it and compared him to a bull. The Baron began counting down from 3 to 1 and was surprised that he had actually succeeded. After the countdown, Kang Ho Han threw the stone on the floor to show that he was done. The crowd cheered. Finally, they could all go home. Someone asked how he knew how to lift the stone, calling him a genius. The Baron, thinking that it was finally over, asked him his name. Hearing this question, he hesitated a little, and the audience thought that he had no name. Finally, he said his name was Kang Ho Han and thought that he would become the best again, and he would become the best in the kingdom of Rheinkall. But his legs were still shaking, and Kang Ho Han realized that his endurance was still low, so he decided to start training his lower body. After a while, Baron Bourgeois put a weapon to his shoulder and asked if he would always remember the weapon around his neck, and would he promise to sacrifice his life to protect this kingdom? Kang Ho Han, meanwhile, thinking that this was not really his life, said he would swear. The Baron appointed him a knight of the kingdom of Rheinkall and said that his knightly surname would be Yellow, and he must serve the kingdom with valor. After that, the Baron told him to stand up and always remember his oath, and when Kang Ho Han stood up, he promised to seal this honor in his heart. People discussed how he had recently been a resident like them, and now he was a writer. Now he could say goodbye to the furnace at the factory, and he would be fed to his heart's content. The Baron said that according to the privilege given to new knights, Yellow could choose 2 people as his squires. In the crowd, one person whispered to another not to stare, because in a society with such a strict hierarchy, it was difficult to look into the eyes of people from different classes. Now Kang Ho Han had become the one who chose. Squires obeyed knights, but it was still better than 15 hours at the factory. One of the spectators said that he thought the 9th team, which was in the same dormitory as him, had a better chance. And Knight Yellow, after thinking for a moment, said that his squire would be from the 9th team. It would be Commander Davis, and he would choose the second one later. Lieutenant Davis was very surprised. Kang Ho Han thought that he was his father's friend and the only adult who cared about him. This man had saved more than one life, and thanks to him, Kang Ho Han also got a second chance. Baron Bourgeois laughed at his decision not to take one person away from him and said that he would receive a gift. He presented him with a magical weapon, a Chapente, which was enchanted with magic that made it stronger and sharper. And for the townspeople, he arranged a day off. Looking at this gift, Kang Ho Han thought about how in his past life, he was just as dirty, but he broke through the soil and became a mighty tree. Later, when Kang Ho Han was sleeping, his dormmates woke him up, saying that he needed to get ready quickly or he would have to stay longer again. After a while, he was already at the factory, where he sometimes had to stay until midnight, but he didn't understand why he was there. Suddenly, one of the workers shouted that the furnace engine had exploded and the evacuation had begun. Another asked Yellow what he was doing and that they needed to run. He thought about how he was sure that yesterday he had become a knight and decided that it was a dream. At that moment, he woke up and realized that there was no need to run and that it was a dream. He hadn't slept so soundly in a long time and even forgot to take off his uniform. He saw an information window that announced that the magic stone was filling him with energy. Looking more closely, he realized that he had lost muscle mass and did not understand why it had decreased, but his mana and magical power had increased. He thought that this was the energy used by knights and wizards. Lifting weights built muscle, and perhaps lifting the magic stone strengthened magic. He tried to summon a storm, but it didn't work. Looking at himself, he thought it was strange because he had lost some muscle, but his body seemed stronger. He thought it was the effect of magical power. At that moment, his squire Davis entered the room and said it was time to go. He bowed, but Kang Ho-han approached him and said he had asked him not to be so formal with him. Davis wanted to object, but he said it had nothing to do with his family. Davis realized he was talking about him and said he hadn't heard the word family in a long time. Kang Go-han showed him his muscles, which were very tense, and asked if he looked like a real rider. He said it was impressive. Davis suggested that he go outside and look around, and showed him the place where the knights trained. They were dressed in clothes made from monster skin. Their muscles were like those of beasts, and they had long weapons. The magical power and mana of these knights were several thousand times greater than his. Knights who were formerly commoners were given surnames according to their rank: yellow, green, blue, red, white, black, silver, and gold. Kang Go-han became yellow, and now he was curious how long it would take to catch up with them. Suddenly, someone put a hand on his shoulder and asked if he was the guy who passed the test. He saluted the person who approached him and introduced himself as Kang Go-han Yellow. The other person laughed and called him a yellow-bellied coward. He told the other knights present that they had a newcomer. They noticed his physique and said he had excellent shoulders. They asked if he had already embraced his new reality and was ready to jump into the giant. The knights told him that real hell awaited him and warned him not to be upset when he realized that he would not be able to control the giant after the test. He was very surprised because he thought that knights became riders immediately. The man who approached him first said that he had a red rank, and only those with white or black ranks officially become riders. One of the knights said that it was not enough to hold the stone to be trusted with a huge machine, and that there was a 3-month selection process ahead. Of course, not everyone would pass this selection process, and if he failed the test, he would not go to the Rider Academy, but to the Academy for Ordinary Knights, like them. They said that he should accept the fact that he would become an ordinary knight, because almost no one passed this test. It was even more difficult for commoners. The men said that becoming a knight is already a great success, and it is better for him to listen to his elders so as not to go through sweat and blood before it is too late. At that moment, Lieutenant Davis approached him and said that they needed to go because a senior knight was summoning him. Davis took him by the hand and led him away. Kang Go-han thought that they might look like silly old men, but they were still stronger than him, and he had a long way to go. They were running when they suddenly saw a man and were a little frightened, and Davis fell to the ground. This man was lifting a magic stone, and Kang Go-han thought that he had barely lifted a stone the size of an egg, but this one looked like a watermelon. He seemed to be not a man, but a beast, and Kang Go-han admitted that he had never seen such amazing muscles. His name was Cult's Black, and his rank was black. This was the surname of a real candidate for the riders. Judging by the stats window, the difference between them was small: 3 kilograms of muscle and 3% body fat. Kang Go-han thought that at his age, people usually became emaciated old men, but he looked perfect. Approaching him, Cult's Black asked if it was him and told him to get in. He started to get dressed, and Kang Go-han thought that he hadn't even introduced himself, that he wanted to look the same. A semi-automatic carriage was waiting for them, and Davis said on the run that it moved faster than usual thanks to steam traction. Getting inside, Kang Go-han said that it looked medieval, but the engineering technology was impressive. He compared it to a large camping vehicle. The driver pulled the lever, shouting that they were leaving, and immediately spurred the horses on. After a long pause, Kang Go-han said that they would probably be spending a lot of time together, but he didn't even know the knight's name to address him properly. Celts Black replied that he could just call him Sir until they got to know each other better. He said that the road to the training center would take 5 days, and that they were now leaving the safe zone. The carriage raced down the road, and he continued, saying that they had to be very careful outside, and that the slightest step or touch of the wrong stone was dangerous. Standing up, he said that he had to follow orders without question, and if there were no orders, he should do nothing and ask no questions. Throwing him a magic stone, Black said that they would continue training even on the road, and that he would not have the strength to ask questions. He gave Yellow the task of lifting the stone 30 times above his head, then doing 30 squats, 3 minutes in a horse stance, and running 300 meters on the spot. As he began training, Kang Go-han wondered if he had angered him with his question. After all, he just wanted to know his name, even though he had already seen it. He lifted the stone several times with effort, thinking that it must be due to its magical power. He could repeat it several times, but he still didn't quite understand. Throwing the stone, he realized that training for the first time in 19 years and studying at the same time was not so easy. Cult's Black, who was watching him, said that he had shown him the method, but that the correct execution of the exercise depended on him. Kang Go-han didn't understand what he meant, because he hadn't said anything. He himself had asked not to be disturbed, but was watching him for some unknown reason. Davis suddenly jumped up on the sofa and scared him, saying that something strange was happening outside. They looked out the window and saw the bourgeois mine. The whole sky was covered with dark smoke coming from the mountain, which was swelling, spewing steam, and vibrating. At first glance, it looked like an active volcano, but steam was even coming from the trees. Could these be the consequences of the great battle? Fragments of the bodies of gods, demons, and dragons? A world created after they departed for the afterlife? Kang Go-han had a feeling that there were sources of energy everywhere that lived their own lives. It became clear why mechanical engineering was so advanced in this era. At that moment, Davis grabbed him by the shoulder and asked him what was wrong. He replied that he had suddenly lost his breath. Kang Go-han himself felt as if the force of gravity had doubled and was delighted by this. Cults Black laughed and said that he should not be surprised. He clarified that this was apparently a zone of high gravity, and Black confirmed his guess. Black explained that the cause of the anomaly was the core, and if it was not destroyed, humans would not survive. Therefore, they only existed outside their territories. Now Kang Ho-han understood why the giant riders were so important. They were necessary for destroying the cores. Cults Black was surprised that he understood immediately, because such insight was hard to find among commoners, but he thought it would be difficult for him to become a rider. After all, if a person had not received an education from childhood, it was almost impossible to quickly increase their strength. And he mentally decided that Kang Go-han would soon understand the despair he felt. Kang Go-han realized that he needed to stimulate his muscles to feel magical power, and the high gravity zone was ideal for training. He picked up the stone again, thinking that now it wasn't just weight that mattered, and that he needed to listen to his body and let the mana flow through him. He forced himself to ignore the pain in his muscles, convincing himself that magic was beyond the physical body, and that he had to focus on the mana. Kang Go-han tried again, and felt as if he had been thrown into lava, and his feet were burning. It was very difficult, but he made an effort because he understood that he must not give up. He counted to 3, his heart pounding like crazy. But then it began, and he felt the movement of power through his legs. It moved up his entire body, and he felt it absorbing magical power. The system notified him that he had felt mana for the first time, and that his magical power was accelerating. Black was surprised that a beginner felt the power on his first day. Kang Go-han was happy that he had succeeded, and decided to try again. It was already the 3rd day, and Davis told him that he needed to conserve his strength so that he wouldn't arrive at the training center exhausted. But Kang Go-han thought that he was training not only his muscles, but also his magic. The mana that had recently felt like a thin thread now resembled a spider's web. After doing another set, he replied that now was the best time to train. Finally, his magical power had increased 21 times, and he decided to take a break to restore his willpower and mana. Kang Go-han's muscle mass had decreased by 400 grams, but his strength had increased by 1 unit, and he believed that now he was quite a strong weakling. Magic allowed him to go beyond the limits of the human body and achieve the perfect form. What if he added magic to his training? He would have a divine body. But there was a problem. In the process of accumulating mana, fat and muscle mass were burned. The bodybuilder's pride did not allow him to give up his muscles, and eating food was also part of his training. Suddenly, the cart swayed, and Davis barely managed to stay on his feet. Kang Ho-han realized that they had left. They had left the high-pressure zone, and Davis could finally breathe normally. Kang Go-han clutched his head, because training under pressure was his favorite. But Davis warned him that it would turn him into a monster. The carriage swayed again, and they thought they had entered the high-gravity zone once more. But then the driver appeared, and, turning to the night, reported that there was an ambush and goblins were approaching. Cults Black, who had been sleeping peacefully all this time, replied that it was very annoying. During the Great Battle, the gods, demons, and dragons hated each other and sent each other to the other world. As a result of these battles, filled with blood and flesh, monsters began to appear. Kang Go-han thought he could see them for himself and looked out the window with Davis. There he saw goblins approaching the carriage, each with a magical power of 700. And the normal strength of goblins was 10 times greater than that of an ordinary human. They were like vicious gorillas, smoking like armor just taken out of the furnace. Leaning out of the carriage, the driver began shooting at the monsters and hit one of them. The goblin fell, but after a while, Kang Ho-han was surprised to see that it had risen again. Apparently, the bullet wasn't powerful enough, but its speed was also insane. Meanwhile, Cults Black finally woke up and, revealing the weapon hidden in his glove, got out of the carriage. His magic power was 5,873, and he quickly dealt with all the monsters. Looking out the window, Kang Go-han admired the greatness of the Black Knight. Davis asked how he knew he was black. He said he would tell him later. Suddenly, the travelers heard strange sounds coming from the forest and the trees shaking. A group of goblins, resembling a pack of rabid dogs, was approaching them. It seemed as if someone was chasing them, and they began to peer into the forest. When they saw that an ogre was following them, they all thought it was bad. When he saw the information window, Kang Go-han couldn't believe the numbers and thought his eyes were deceiving him. His muscle mass was 950 kilograms, and his magical power was 15,000. Realizing that the goblins were apparently using them as bait, the men decided to change the direction of the cart. Cults Black told the driver to take them back to the road and then return to the roof, while he began to prepare large caliber weapons. He started shooting at the goblins, but realized that they could only slow them down, and there were too many of them. Black yelled at the driver to keep shooting at anyone who approached. The driver asked what he himself was going to do. He was going to cut off the ogre's leg so that it would stop chasing them. Kang Go-han thought that the difference in strength between them was still too great. Black's magical power was 3 times less, and his normal power was 50 times less. The ogre was comparable to 1,000 adults, and no matter how strong the knight night was, it was still too dangerous. Before he could think that they needed some kind of tactic, Black looked inside and asked for his booster. Handing him the booster, Kang Go-han asked if he could help in any way. He replied that he would help if he didn't get out of the carriage. After all, it was his job to deliver him safely. After strapping on his booster, preparing his weapon, and activating his magical abilities, Black prepared to attack. He told the driver that he would attack the ogre and the goblins would also scatter, but until then, he must protect the carriage at all costs. Black jumped out of the carriage, and the driver thought that he must have a gift. It seemed that the knight could control the wind. Kang Go-han thought that a gift was a supernatural power that only a few knights had awakened, and perhaps his window of information was also a gift. The driver continued shooting and said that fate was on their side and that victory was assured for the knight with the gift. And today, only the goblins would lose. Soon, flying over the monsters' heads, Cult's Black landed behind the fence and attracted his attention. The ogre turned around, preparing to attack, but Black jumped aside and said that he was moving too slowly and that he was already somewhere else. Looking at this, Kang Go-han said that Black was faster than him. Davis couldn't even see the movements. Although the ogre was strong, without speed, it was completely useless. Meanwhile, Black was distracting the ogre and dealing with the goblins at the same time. His plan worked, and after a while, the pursuers fell behind the cart. Seeing this, Black shouted that the time had come, and it was time to start the main game. The ogre attacked him with his weapon, but Black jumped out of the way in time. Jumping at his opponent from the other side, he struck and hit his leg. Kang Go-han was delighted to see that he had hit his target, and Davis said that the weapon had hit the mark. But Black turned around and thought that this couldn't be. His body was like metal, and his weapon left only a scratch on his opponent's leg. And then he noticed that the ogre had become enraged. His skin began to tighten, and his body began to swell. The monster began to attack, becoming much faster, and Black could barely dodge his blows. The ogre struck again, and Kang Go-han and Davis, who were watching, began to worry about the knight. At that moment, the driver saw a goblin approaching them. He didn't understand why it hadn't run away with the others. Apparently, it was targeting the cart. He started shooting at it, shouting for it not to come closer, and that this time, it wouldn't dodge. He managed to hit the goblin, and it fell, but at the last moment, it caught hold of the roof and climbed back up. Deciding that it could break the carriage, the driver started hitting it with another weapon to make it let go. Kang Go-han, who was looking out the window, decided that if they didn't deal with him, they would be finished. Realizing that he had to do something, Kang Go-han rushed for his weapon. Seeing that the goblin had already climbed onto the carriage and was ready to attack the driver, he knew he had only one chance. He prepared to attack and needed to concentrate all his magic into one strike. It was his one and only PM. Meanwhile, the ogre attacked Black with weapons emanating from his body. Black barely managed to dodge the attacks, and at one point thought that now it was his turn to give it his all. Quickly running up to the ogre from behind, he said he wasn't done and had one more strike left. Meanwhile, Kang Go-han focused and struck the goblin that had attacked the driver with his weapon. The driver yelled at the monster to leave him alone, pushed it away, and noticed that the goblin had already been defeated. Davis, who was watching Black's actions from the window, warned that the knight's gift had helped, and the ogre could no longer catch up. Jumping back onto the cart and seeing the defeated goblin, Black asked if Kang Go-han had done it, and if he had used magical power. Meanwhile, he was thinking about how he had been able to release all his mana at once for the first time. The mana had been used to its limit, and the magical power was developing faster. Inside the cart, bandaging his wounds, Black thought it was strange that ogres had appeared in this area. But even stranger was that the newbie had sent the goblin to the other world. After all, it hadn't even been a week since this puppy had touched the magic stone. He even thought that maybe he was a genius. And then, Kang Go-han turned around and asked him what to do with the goblin's lifeless body. Black replied that it was his prey, and he could sell it at the training center. Monster bodies don't rot, so he could leave it there. Kang Go-han was surprised that they didn't rot, and asked if he could eat it. Black replied that eating such meat to increase magical power was just a rumor. He had tried it himself, but got indigestion, so it was not worth doing. But he replied that everything would be fine with him, because his gift was an information window about nutrition, and that was the main ingredient in magical compounds. It was a kind of protein, because magical power also had a dietary supplement that promoted growth, just like muscles. Black thought about why he should try to convince him, and that it was none of his business if he made himself worse. After a while, he was already frying the meat, and the information window told him how long it would take for the toxicity to be eliminated. Finally, the information window signal disappeared, and everything was ready. Kang Go-han gritted his teeth and was ready to swallow the meat to increase his magical power. Taking a bite, he didn't understand the taste he felt at first. Davis said that it probably wasn't tasty. And who would even think of eating monsters? Black smirked. He knew that this meat was like shoe leather. Indigestion was supposed to start in 3 minutes, but that was far from the worst of it. But Kang Go-han was surprised to find that he hadn't tasted anything like this in 19 years. It was a 2-second miracle. It was during this interval that the taste unfolded. After eating one piece, he said he wanted more and took another. This surprised those present so much that their eyes bulged. Black thought that he could already use magical power and calmly eat monster meat, and did not understand what Kang Go-han was. Kang Go-han offered some to Davis and the driver, but the smell was similar to fermented soybean paste and durian, so they refused. Then Black agreed to try it, even though he was not very hungry. The other men decided that if the gentleman was going to eat it, then they would too, and they took a plate of meat. After tasting the meat, Black was surprised to find that it was the best sauce, and the meat melted in his mouth, and the aftertaste on the tip of his tongue was the only proof that he had eaten it. And even though it was similar to Elian cuisine, he still couldn't believe it. It felt as if a magical power was awakening. Kang Ho Han, eating another piece, told them to enjoy it because he wouldn't be giving them any more. At that moment, the knight gave his name as Cults Black and said he could just call him Cults. He said that Kang Ho Han had made a significant contribution and that he would give him another goblin when they got there. And it wasn't that he wanted more meat. Lieutenant Davis looked at him and thought he had become more talkative and decided that meat was the best remedy for a bad mood. After a while, Kang Ho Han was training again, and Black thought he was changing every day and felt his magical power increasing. He accidentally said out loud that he might be a monster. Kang Ho Han turned around and asked what he had said, but Black replied that he hadn't said anything. Then he asked Sir Cowles if he would return to his duties when this assignment was over. He clarified that he was talking about the giant riders, as it seemed to him that the white and black ranks could officially control them. Cult Black sat with his head bowed and remained silent. And then Kang Ho Han thought that it seemed that everything was not so simple, and apparently he was angry. Finally, Black broke the silence and said that he had been expelled from the academy. Kang Ho Han was very surprised by this. He said that during the mission, they were attacked by the kingdom of Logot. There was an order to retreat, but he ignored it to save his friend. As a result, he failed and lost the giant. Disobedience is a serious crime, and his expulsion was inevitable. He spoke about the giant, saying that losing the machine was like a bird losing its wings. And so he asked Knight Yellow Kong Gohan never to repeat his mistake and to be much more careful. As he left, Black said that they would arrive tomorrow, so he should stop training and check his condition. Looking at him, Kong Gohan thought that it was melancholy because deep down, he wanted to return to his former life and his muscles. After a while, he was doing some stretching. Davis said that he had been told not to train today and that it was time to get dressed. Looking out the window, they saw a group of workers operating a huge machine. They realized that they had finally arrived at the training center, the place where raiders were trained and giants were created. Kang Ho Han climbed out of the hatch and saw a giant machine whose power was comparable to that of the gods. Getting out of the carriage, Black announced that a candidate from Baron Bourgeois, Sir Kang Gohan Yellow, had arrived. He showed the royal examiner's certificate. Meanwhile, he stood and looked at the giant, which was 8 meters tall, like a 3-story building. It looked more like a living beast than a machine. A man emerged from the giant, and Kang Gohan saw that his name was Rafal White, and that he had almost 3,000 points of magical power. He realized that this was, of course, a white-ranked official cadet rider. He looked to be about 20 years old, but his characteristics were on par with those of a 30-year-old knight. Taking the documents, Rafal White ordered the trainees to line up on the training ground. Standing in line, Kang Gohan thought he had returned to the army, and then he saw people in front of him and became curious about who these spectators were. Perhaps they were trainees and escorts who had arrived earlier. Then he saw that hundreds of people had gathered around the giant, and they all had stern looks on their faces. The men sitting on the giant discussed that it was the last group's turn. They were curious to see how many newcomers would pass in the end. Rafal White, introducing himself as the training center instructor, welcomed the last group of 13 people. He said that their actions would determine whether they would move on or become temporary guests. The entrance test began, and one by one, they had to sit in the giant and take off. Kang Gohan was surprised. He didn't know there would be an entrance test. He looked at Black, who didn't say anything to him, and realized that this was why he had to stop training. Starting to get angry, he thought about how many tests there would be if he was now a cadet candidate, and they should teach takeoff before starting practice. Then someone behind him said that he was obviously a commoner, as it was written on his sloppy face. Kang Gohan turned around to see who was adding fuel to the fire. It was a girl who introduced herself as Lowen Yellow and asked his name. He introduced himself as Kang Gohan Yellow. She explained that landing in a giant synchronization and activation is takeoff, and added that poor people don't know that. After her words, Lowen Yellow smiled, made a gesture with her hands, spreading her fingers, and said that this is how it should be done. Kang Gohan did not understand that this was possibly a way of greeting among free people, intertwining their fingers when meeting for the first time. Making the same gesture, he reached out his hands to her, but Lowen, angered, asked what he was doing and that he could lose his hands. Crouching down, she said that he should put his hands on the bottom of the cabin. This would synchronize the rider's power with the giant, and the engine would start. She said that after that, enormous pressure would be exerted, and once he had overcome it, he should stand up, and the takeoff would be complete, thus completing the synchronization. Kang Gohan listened to her words in surprise, and she finally said that this way, the rider and the giant would become one. Lowen added that this way, the giant would repeat his movements, and he would see the world through its eyes. Patting him on the shoulder, she said that he didn't need to worry. His magical power would be enough. At first, she thought he wasn't poor. He thought that she could probably sense magical power. He thanked her and asked how she knew all this. She replied that her family had a great passion for education, and that she had touched a magic stone at the age of 14. Lowen advised him to take a closer look at their rivals. A group of 13 people, Among them, only 4 stood out, including them. Pointing to one young man, she said that at first glance, he looked strong and was almost 2 meters tall, and his name was Curled, she thought. Pointing to another young man, she said that he was quite handsome, but had a sharp gaze. His name was Harcrux, and he was also from a poor family. But he had accumulated enough magical power, and his concentration was excellent. Listening to Lowen, Kang Go-han did not understand how she obtained this information. Meanwhile, she said that the test was about to begin, and suggested that they watch. Before the test began, Rafal White instructed them to remember one thing: not to lose their minds, and pressed the projector button. An image from the cockpit appeared, and Rafal White warned that they could suffer serious injuries, or even death. He said that when takeoff began, they would be subjected to tremendous pressure, and at first, it would seem as if they were suffocating, and then their heads would spin. They would have to decide whether they were capable or not. If they felt they were losing control, it would be better to abort the takeoff. He added that it was better to fail the exam than to go to the other world, and that only the best of the best ever became writers. There was no shame in failure. And he said it was better not to try to overcome what they did not understand. Giants are fighting machines that imitate gods, created in their likeness using ancient knowledge. And today, they would understand what it meant to gain their power. Finally, it was time to take off, and Rafal White told the examinee to put both hands on the floor. The first examinee, as instructed, squatted down and, putting his hands on the floor, immediately felt a powerful pressure. It became increasingly difficult for him to breathe, and he was already struggling to inhale and exhale. Looking at the screen, Kang Go-han thought that it was similar to what he had seen in his past life. It was the L breathing method used by fighter pilots. The acceleration of such aircraft was terrifying for the pilot, who was subjected to pressure 9 to 10 times greater than normal. The pilot tensed all the muscles in his body and accelerated blood circulation to counteract this pressure. This was how a force that exceeded human capabilities was controlled by people. It was like riding a giant, confronting a divine force. A short time passed, and the examinee could hardly breathe and asked to stop the test. While he was being unloaded from the giant, Rafal White said that he was a good man, and that even though he had given up, he would still remain a knight, because the life of each of them was precious. He invited the next examinee, but after a while, he also gave up and withdrew. Looking at his suffering, Kang Ho-han thought that they, like him, were lifting a magic stone. And apparently, this task was very difficult. It was the next person's turn, and Curled headed for the giant. He was promising, as Lowen said, and Kang Ho-han was curious to see if it was true. It was also very difficult for him, but Curled was successful, and the giant took flight. Kang Go-han and Lowen rejoiced at this success, and she was also happy that she had guessed correctly. The giant rejoiced with Curled, and Kang Go-han thought that this was the joy of becoming one with the giant. And then, everyone watching this event saw Rafal White get into the giant. He did it in just 10 seconds, while Curled had been groaning for more than 2 minutes. Once inside the giant, Rafal White congratulated the cadet on joining, and now he had to try to block his attacks. The others were very surprised that it was so sudden, and how a newcomer who had just taken off could repel the attacks of a White-ranked pilot. And White's giant was already rushing into the attack. He made 1 strike, and then a second. Finally, he delivered the decisive blow, and Curled's giant remained lying on the ground. Rafal White said that they already had 1 entrant, and now there were only 9 people left. Kang Go-han did not understand how it was possible to attack so roughly, even after a successful test. He thought that he wanted to destroy morale and intimidate everyone. Finally, Rafal White gave the command to continue the exam. Everyone watched the next candidate trying to overcome synchronization. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to breathe under such pressure, and the others thought it would be better for him to give up. After a while, he fell. Suddenly, the security system sounded an alarm, indicating that an emergency had occurred, and the riders rushed to help. But as soon as they entered the giant, they realized it was too late. The examinee had passed away. Seeing his lifeless body being carried out on a stretcher, Kang Go-han wondered if he could handle it himself. The atmosphere in this place was completely different, and these people were not like the idiots from the Baron's castle. Among their group, 1 was seriously injured, 5 had minor injuries, and 1 had passed away. But they did not waver at all. They had the willpower that could not be shaken by failure, even if something terrible awaited them ahead. When it was the next person's turn, Harcrux volunteered to go. Kang Go-han watched him calmly enter the giant and thought that it was probably politeness to those who had failed and that he would not run away. Soon, Rafal White reported that Harcrux was the second to pass, and he had completed the ascent in 1 minute and 40 seconds, surpassing Curled. Rejoicing in his victory, Lowen told Kang Ho-han that she had said he was a natural rider. While Harcrux was preparing for White's giant attacks, Kang Ho-han thought that by digesting his previous failures, his strategy had been refined. None of the failed guys were left here, but they had achieved everything together. White began to attack, and in the end, Harcrux's giant, after withstanding 4 blows, fell to the ground. Kang Go-han believed that this was hazing that trampled on success and absurd boasting of power, and he mentally promised Raphael White that he would also contribute to the success of the newcomers and let him try his punch. Davis, meanwhile, sat in the stands and watched the exam. Suddenly, a young man bumped into him and apologized, saying he was so small. He turned around, and the young man, seeing his face, said that he was just another old squire who was supposed to defend him, but couldn't even lift a spoon. He and his friend decided that he was the squire of the last poor knight, and they laughed at the fact that he had chosen an old man, calling him crazy. Davis got angry, stood up and asked what they had said. They began to laugh at the old man's anger and told him to relax or his blood pressure would rise. 2 other young men intervened and asked what they were doing and if they weren't being too rude. But they started a fight and said that they were the White Knight's squires and that they didn't understand why the Yellow Knight's servants were opening their mouths. One of them grabbed the young man who had stood up for Davis by the hair and said that this was the jungle, and if he didn't have the strength, he should kneel obediently. Davis, who was watching this, thought about his words about the jungle and that it was no worse than working 15 to 18 hours a day in hard labor. He had seen a lot in the Baron's castle. For example, how people were sent to the otherworld in a blast furnace. But this was not a battlefield where weapons were a must. Davis said that maybe he wasn't too old yet and had a sharp tongue. He asked if it turned out that not only knights had ranks, but also squires. Since they were so confident, he offered to make a bet and put 5 silver coins on his knight to pass and take first place. They accepted his offer, saying that it was probably a month's salary, and one of them bet on Lowen, who was educated and from a free family. Looking at the coins in his hand, Davis thought that it wasn't a month's salary, but what he had saved his whole life. But now, what mattered was the image of a man who had developed every day and defeated a goblin with 1 blow, and the surprised face of Cult's Black. And Lieutenant Davis, hoping for Kang Go-han, decided to go all in. The others thought that the poor old man had bet all his money on a poor man. Meanwhile, Lowen looked at Kang Go-han and said that he had a scary look in his eyes, and that this was probably his firm determination. But she said that today they would have to give in, and pointed to 2 people who, according to her reliable information, had taken the first 2 places even before they arrived. She pointed to one of these newcomers named Geralt Yellow, who took 2nd place because he held out against Raphael for a minute. First place went to Helena Yellow, who held out for a minute and a half and even tried to counterattack once. Of course, Raphael dodged her blow, but still took a step back, and Lowen considered this an amazing result. Then, winking at Kang Go-han, she said that she would be today's heroine because she would force Raphael to retreat 2 steps. He looked at her stats. Her mana was 59.7, and her magical power was 573. She was really strong, but it was still less than the others, and he wondered if it was possible to overcome this difference with skill. Entering the giant, she took a breath, and soon, Raphael said that the takeoff was 1 minute and 20 seconds, which was the best result in this group. Raphael and the giant began to attack Lowen, but she was able to avoid the first blow, and ended up holding out for 45 seconds. Although she was unable to counterattack, she defended herself and dodged 17 attacks, and it was a good fight. Kang Go-han mentally thanked Lowen, because this would make it easier for him to control the giants. He was certain that if her fall moved, the game would be over. After all, if you defend yourself from the first attack or dodge the next ones, you won't be able to respond. And there was a difference in ability and experience between them. The probability of him being beaten was high. Helena, who dismissed this and tried to attack, was simply a monster. But could he do it? His magical power was 107, which he had managed to increase in just a few days. But his mana was only a 5th of Lowen's. While he was warming up, he thought about how his magical power growth had slowed down when it exceeded 100. It seemed that the situation was similar to muscle growth, but neither Garroth nor Helena could have defeated the goblin, and he defeated it, and even Sir Kultz was surprised by this. He understood that fighting was not just about numbers, and if he struck at a weak spot, and luck was on his side, Kang Go-han could do it, and he needed to focus. Kang Go-han concentrated and confidently entered the giant. Once inside, he immediately smelled the scent of blood, iron, and oil. The door slammed behind him, and he looked around. The space inside was about 7 square meters, but he had the feeling that behind this darkness, there was only a boundless universe. Then Raphael told him to start taking off. He thought that Raphael hadn't explained anything, and that he just needed to touch the floor with his hands to understand. Touching the floor with his hands, Kang Go-han felt pressure and realized that it was the same pressure he felt when he squatted with a weight of 200 kilograms. But he remembered this routine well, because he had encountered it a million times in his past life. He took a deep breath and tensed his abdominal muscles. Pressure began to build on his abdominal cavity, and he had to resist the weight. But still, it felt like something else. Not just simple heaviness, because it wasn't just his bones and muscles that were tense. It was the highest level of pressure, as if even his soul was being pulled to the bottom. But it was not like pressure from above. Kang Go-han had the impression that a giant was absorbing mana, as if creating a vacuum. He realized that he needed to feel the magical power, because that was the only way to cope with such pressure. Kang Go-han tried to gather his entire body and squeeze out his mana. Finally, he felt the giant's heart, a pulsating, unknown force. This force grew, and like a pump pumping water, Kang Go-han pumped it out in one breath, without hesitation and without losing strength. It felt as if his whole body was falling apart, but he made one more effort. Finally, he succeeded, and synchronization with the giant took place. Even Cult's Black watched this process. It was a success, and in less than a minute, those present began to ask if he was not one of the poor. Kang Go-han opened his eyes and rejoiced in his victory. It was sweet for him. He looked at the people below, and realized that now he could see everything through the eyes of the giants. Freed from his small and weak human body, he felt superior, as if he had become a god. He had a feeling of omnipotence, capable of destroying even the most enormous mountain. It was an ecstasy similar to honey being poured into his brain, but he stopped these thoughts. He needed to pull himself together, because he had only one chance to right Raphael. Considering the previous results, the game would be over if Raphael moved, and he had only one attempt. Lowen, for example, had strong mana, but her willpower was similar to his, and she divided and used her mana 17 times. But Kang Ho-han decided to do things differently. Using all his willpower at once, he was going to release his mana to the limit. He just had to seize the moment. He remembered that Raphael's takeoff time was 10 seconds. That was enough time for a surprise attack, and the giant rushed forward. From inside his giant, Rafal said it was worth trying something else, but Kang Go-han's giant had already attacked, and he fell to the ground. There was a loud crash, and the people present trying to take cover from the dust that rose. This is how a newcomer, sitting in a giant for the first time, was able to defeat a white-ranked cadet. And although Rafal was caught off guard, it would be a big blow to him when he came to. Therefore, Kang Go-han decided to stop there, because his mana was already running out. But Raphael's comrades thought it was cheating, and that it couldn't be that a newbie, who was supposed to be intimidated, had humiliated Raphael. They said that he attacked like a coward and decided to run away, and that he shouldn't look down on his seniors, and they decided to go and deal with Kang Go-han. But at that moment, he was thinking that this was official hazing, meant to break the spirit of newcomers, and he believed that this result was enough. Raphael's comrades headed towards him to show him what real hazing was. The spectators in the stands decided that it would be interesting. Seeing a group of people coming towards him, Davis shouted about it to Kang Go-han. He finally turned around and saw several men running towards him. He proudly thought that they wanted to congratulate him, but laughed and said that there was no need for that. But at that moment, Raphael's giant gestured to his comrades to stop. Climbing out of the giant, he asked the intern's name, and he introduced himself as Kang Go-han Yellow. He said he would remember, and turning around, told the others to arrange a place for him to spend the night. The men were angry and did not understand why Raphael had decided to just leave, and they threatened Kang Go-han that they would see about that. When they all left, he breathed a sigh of relief, because it had not been easy for him, and he had used all his strength at once. Sitting on the ground, he thought about how fighting against the pressure that could destroy him was terrifying. He remembered the moment when he had exhausted all his mana, and then the whole world had turned into a small dot. At that moment, the body and mind disappear from a person, leaving only willpower and a feeling of satisfaction, as if he had touched God. He looked at Sir Kultz. Now it was clear what that longing was, and perhaps his action would be the right decision. Meanwhile, the squires were discussing whether there had ever been an intern who had defeated a white rank on the entrance test, but no one had heard of such a thing. But it wasn't just about rank, because they said that Rafal was the strongest of them all. Some even believed that he would soon become black. One of the squires said that they had lost a lot of money in the bet. Another replied that there was nothing to worry about, and that they should just ignore him. He believed that he would not do anything to them. Another young man said that it was true, because a yellow-ranked squire had to pay white-ranked squires, and they decided to leave before the old man started nagging. But at that moment, Kultz Black appeared behind them and asked where they were going. Turning around, they were surprised to see a knight approaching them. Kultz Black asked why they were now placing bets in the sacred training center. Frightened by the realization that this was a black-ranked knight, they said it was just a little game between squires. Black said that games were fine because he wasn't a very strict person either. He asked if they had played with that old man Davis. The young man asked how he knew his name, and Black replied that they had met a couple of times, riding in a carriage and dealing with goblins. He asked them if they were going to follow the rules of the game, to which they replied that only people without honor break their promise. They thought it was probably a threat and didn't understand why the Black Knight decided to intervene at all. Black said that some jokers who don't understand words have their ears cut off and asked if they were listening carefully. As soon as he said this, the squires rushed from the stands after Davis, shouting that they were looking for him. Watching the young men run away, Kultz Black remembered the day he disobeyed the order to retreat. He remembered his friend shouting at him to run faster because they could buy some time with the golems. Everyone ran into the bunker to wait for reinforcements, but Black ran in the other direction and could not be stopped. Disregarding orders, he climbed into his giant and ran, mentally asking his friend to hold on a little longer, but he did not make it in time. Later, the commander told him that since he had disobeyed orders, he must take responsibility, and that riders were more important than ordinary people. Disobedience was a serious crime, and he was expelled and had to return the giant. Sitting on his giant for the last time, he apologized to his classmates and to him for not being able to protect them. He thanks the giant for being with him and said that his principles were also the giant's principles. Looking into the bag containing 90 silver coins, Davis thought that this was 18 times more than he had saved in his entire life. He laughed at his good fortune because he had made the bet in anger and had thought he would lose the money. Kang Ho-han approached him and asked where it came from and what all these people were doing there. Davis handed him 45 silver coins, saying that it was his share and he would only take half. Kang asked why he needed so much. He replied that he had heard that knights constantly lose money. Kang Ho-han agreed, because they had to pay taxes. At that moment, a man approached them and, introducing himself as a supply soldier, said he would take him to his place of residence. Kang Ho-han realized that he had acted officially, but asked him to wait a moment and walked away. At that moment, Kultz Black was thinking that perhaps everything could have turned out differently if Kang Go-han had been able to develop at a faster pace. Kang Go-han approached him and asked what he was looking at. Black replied that the weather was nice and added that he was no longer obliged to train him. He said that now he needed to follow the instructions of the training center, and Kang Go-han said that he wasn't sure, but wanted to try. He said that the ecstasy during takeoff and the feeling of omnipotence were impossible to forget once you had experienced them. And so he asked Black to join him as his squire. Black got angry and said that he was crazy. Holding out a bag of money, Kang Ho Han said it was a deposit and that he was betting on Sir Calza's abilities. But then he realized that wasn't the problem. So he said he would let him control the giant. He would become a truly outstanding rider, and his squires would also be granted permission. Clutching his head, Black asked what he was talking about. He said that a rider who disobeyed orders would never be able to ride a giant again. Kang Ho Han replied that there were no unbreakable rules, and that he would be the one to rewrite them. He asked Sir Caltz if he would bet on him. As a result of the exam, out of 500 yellow knights, 78 passed the test. Lowen pointed to the so-called public dining room, which was located under the chief's tower. There, they served the famous dishes of the training center. Everyone was curious about when they would be fed, and on the way, they marveled at the excellent view. Seeing the sunset, Lowen was delighted and said that you could even see the land beyond the district. The coach forbade them to leave the dining hall and market area and said that they would gather at this place after the 7th bell rang. He also said that they could eat in peace, but if they were late, he would make them show everything they had eaten. Kang Ho Han thought that there must be dark mana in the training center's dining room that helps with development. After all, even eating is training. The coach looked at him and thought that this was the trainee who had sent Raphael fly. The cadets rushed to the food, all so tired that they wanted to relax a little. Suddenly, there was a noise, and at first, no one understood what it was. But then, Lowen saw the newcomer, Jiro. He had apparently bumped into Harcrux and was now standing there swearing that they had apparently just decided to shut up and eat. Turning to Harcrux, he told him to open his eyes and asked if he was one of the poor. Then he added that beggars were getting on his nerves today. Harcrux got angry, asked him to repeat what he said, and rushed at him with his fists, but Garo dodged his blow. Turning around, he punched his opponent in the face, knocking him to the ground. He said it was worth clarifying that everyone with the surname Yellow was equal in rank. The other cadets, enraged, were ready to fight him and asked where he came from, calling him a lick spittle. They asked if he really thought he could do whatever he wanted just because he was a nobleman. They said he only opened his mouth because he had come in 3rd place. Garot said they could come closer, and when they rushed to attack him, he easily scattered them in different directions. At that moment, Harcrux ran up behind him, but Garot noticed him and kicked him. He fell, and Garoth pressed his head to the ground with his boot and said that he was annoying him, and now he would behave more quietly. He said that from now on, they needed to be more careful, especially the poor. Otherwise, he would show them what class differences meant. The other cadets called for Kang Ho Han, but he thought that now was not the time for that. Meanwhile, Caltz Black looked out the window and told the director that there was some commotion outside, but the director replied that they were not yet official writers. The director offered him tea and said that they should sort things out themselves. Black realized that he was constantly training, and he replied that it was a habit. Looking at Kang Ho Han, the director said he was amazing and asked how Black had taught him. He replied that he hadn't taught him and that it seemed like this kid had used up all his mana at once. The director laughed at the fact that he did such things with ease, even though he was from a poor family. He added that talent cannot be hidden anyway, and he understood why Black came to him himself. He decided to guess and said that Black had decided to accept the position of instructor, which he had previously refused. And he decided to accept this position because of this child. Black was silent for a while. He remembered how Kang Ho Han had offered to become his squire, saying that he would make it so that even a squire could control a giant. Then he asked if he knew what he was talking about. Kang Ho Han replied that he did not know, but from that moment on, he would find out. He said that he had lived in poverty for 19 years, but had become a knight, and that it was not necessary to just go with the flow from now on. Black told him to take the money back, and he thought that he was refusing after all. He said that he was very surprised today that he could use mana freely, even though he had lifted a stone a week ago, and that he could be considered a genius. But he clarified whether he used mana at once, and Kang Ho Han asked how he knew. He replied that the method of using mana in one burst was the technique of the legendary writer Gurpin Galia, but you need to be sensitive to your strength. Kang Ho Han thought that it was the same with muscles. It was not enough to build them up. You had to know how to use them. There's even a condition called gluteal amnesia, caused by the habit of sitting for long periods of time, when the muscles atrophy and sensitivity is dulled. And even though beginners in fitness do exercises for the glutes, these muscles are not stimulated at all, so all the load goes to the lower back and knees. Proper stimulation is important in exercise. For example, in chest exercises, you should feel like your chest is about to burst. It takes a long time to strengthen and properly control the motor nerves. But what about magical power? Kang Ho Han understood that Black was saying that magical power cannot be controlled perfectly, but he did it. But Black replied that it was a huge risk to his life and not an easy decision. Black said that he had shocked him twice. The first time was when he defeated the goblin, and the second was when he knocked down the White Knight. He added that he could try to surprise him a third time, and if he proved that it wasn't just luck, he would accept his offer. Of course, both the one who offers such a thing and the one who agrees to it are crazy. The director realized that he had guessed correctly, and that Black wanted to keep him and watch him. Turning around, he said that wasn't the case, but pinning a badge on him, he said that no matter what the reason, it was a good choice. He believed that Black had once again found what made his heart beat. Turning around, the director waved to Black, saying that it was time for him to go and that he had things to do. Meanwhile, Kang Go-han was studying information about Hero Yellow. His magical power was 669, which stunned him. He had 4 times more power and 6 times more mana. In addition, he had amazing fighting skills, and he would not be able to defeat him. At that moment, Lowen approached him and asked if he knew why Garou was behaving that way. He replied that the rich kid was angry that he had been surpassed on the test. He walked away, and Lowen, angry, said that he knew everything, but was leaving anyway. Kang Ho-han replied that this was not the most important thing right now. As he walked away, he thought that poor people did not have time for games, and that he would have to develop his magical power even in his sleep to close the gap. Right now, the most important thing for him was dark mana, and he tried to find it in the dining room. Lowen followed him and said that he was a coward, but that wasn't true. Staring at the food and realizing that something was wrong, Kang Go-han began to get angry, and Lowen asked him what he was looking for, but he didn't answer. There was too little food with dark mana in the dining room and too much with light mana. He didn't know how to understand this and didn't understand what spirituality in food was. Looking at what spirituality was, he realized that it was a form that mana turned into, and with its help, one could win the favor of creatures and animals. But if you overdo it, the magical power dulls and the effectiveness drops, and he realized that it was the last fat to be excreted from the body. When Kang Ho-han realized that light mana was carbohydrates and that he would lose muscle and accordingly magical power, he grabbed his hair. But he figured out how to fix the situation, and after a while, he was already pulling a cart with goblin meat behind him. He was happy that he could eat whatever he wanted. The other cadets didn't understand how he could spend money to eat this meat and decided that he had gone mad. Kang Go-han began to cook meat, thinking that there was almost no dark mana in the cafeteria food, but plenty of light mana. It was a dangerous diet for writers. Of course, he understood that fat was necessary to cover large, beautiful muscles, and that carbohydrates were also necessary for gaining mass. But all this was needed after he had gained enough protein, and as he took a bite of meat, he decided to show everyone the power of proper nutrition. Lowen asked if he really didn't want to fill his stomach with delicacies. He replied that you can't start a meal with nasty things. She asked again if he was talking about the divine dishes in the writer's dining room. They said that you could feel a surge of strength from just 1 spoonful. Smiling, he said that carbohydrates were a calorie bomb, tasty and energizing. She asked what carbohydrates were and what was wrong with tasty food. Turning away, Kang Ho-han said he would not share, and Lowen replied angrily that she did not need it. Seeing the instructor, Lowen pointed at him and said that he doesn't eat food from the cafeteria, but roasts goblin meat. When Kang Go-han realized that this instructor was Sir Kultz, he turned away, and when he approached, he said that he would sell 1 serving of meat for 2 silver coins. Black asked since when goblins had become so expensive. Then Kang Go-han said that for Sir Kultz, it was 3.5 coins. He asked if he was joking, but it didn't seem like it, and he took out the coins. He reminded him that Black had promised him a goblin that cost 1.5 coins at the market. He called him a speculator and said he could buy it himself. Kang Go-han smiled and said that then he wouldn't cook, and that indigestion probably wasn't such a big problem for him. Black didn't know for sure, but perhaps the secret to Kang Go-han's development was in the meat, especially since it was much tastier. So he gave him the money and said he wanted a double portion, and the man thanked Black for the deal and said the order was accepted. Lowen was burning with curiosity when she saw that even the Black Knight was willing to pay, and she gave Kang Go-han 2 silver coins. He offered to treat Uncle Davis, who thanked him and wished him bon appetit. Black noticed that meat was free for Squire. Even Hero Yellow became interested in what was happening at their table, especially since there was even a Black instructor there. Later, Kang Go-han checked his information window. Now, the daily norm was 2 kilograms of meat. This meant that it increased as magic grew. Such nutrition would soon reach its limit, and now that Lowen had eaten the goblin's meat, the rate of recovery would become faster. As he pondered this, he felt a strange sensation, like a tickle, an almost imperceptible reaction from his body. The window with the characteristics and nutrition information was very good, but it seems like there was something else. Sir Kultz had the gift of wind, and perhaps he knew something. He asked Sir Kultz how he got his gift. Sir Kultz said it was a strange question, especially during a meal. Black said that a gift is not something you can get at will. It just appears, like a present. Realizing that the ability is determined randomly, Kang Go-han asked if he could change the attribute to water or fire if he controlled the wind. Kultz Black replied that the ability could not be changed because it was said to be determined subconsciously. For example, he had loved windy days since childhood. Kang Go-han's subconscious desire was the unattainable dream of his past life, to become even bigger and stronger. And the window with the characteristics and the window about nutrition were in Korean, which means that it was all an unconscious manifestation. Black said that abilities could be improved. At first, he could create a cool breeze, and now he could make his body as light as a leaf in the wind. This was possible with concentration and imagination during training. He thought about what he could do with his gift and moved accordingly. Then Lowen patted Kang Go-han on the shoulder and asked why he was asking about this. She asked the instructor if he had any advice on assigning training machines. Kang Go-han didn't know about the ceremony. Lowen was surprised because she thought he was friends with the instructor instructor. He replied that he hadn't even mentioned the entrance test. Black said that at the ceremony, they would have to choose a giant that they would study for 3 months, and it was about the best and most suitable machine. They needed excellent intuition, and the appearance had to be clean and symmetrical. Simple combat plates were better than intricate ones. When he said all this, Lowen stood up and thanked him. He replied that it was just common sense and nothing to be surprised about. Finally, it was time for Kang Ho-han to eat carbohydrates because he also needed to replenish his light mana. In addition, he needed a large amount of fat, which would give him more muscle, and by gaining spirituality, he would fill his whole body with strength. But then he felt a disgusting taste and realized that the taste of carbohydrates was too harsh. Even Lowen, looking at him, understood that he didn't like it. She looked at him in surprise, and Kang Ho-han thought that this was the only way he could become even heavier. At night, Kang Ho-han couldn't sleep because Uncle Davis was snoring too loudly. He thought that the offer he had made to Black was crazy. 3 people would share a tent, and there would be snoring. But on the other hand, the fact that he didn't refuse right away and set a condition instilled confidence. And thinking that he would never disappoint him, he started training again, deciding that he would not stop for anything. Holding the magic stone in his hands, he remembered Sir Kaltz's words that the secret to developing a gift lies in concentration and imagination. He focused on what kind of gift he would like to receive. It had to be something that suited his previous life as a bodybuilder. He began to list the characteristics window, an information window that helped him develop. But all this was not enough. Information about nutrition was necessary before training, and the characteristics window showed the results of training. He needed real-time information about which muscles were well-developed and which needed additional training. He wanted to see his inner magical power, mana, and spirituality, dark and light energies. He wanted to see his transcendent body. Finally, he realized that he needed something like a mirror. And then he saw that his gift was beginning to change. He felt that the streams of light mana were intertwining with each other and becoming pure spirituality. The characteristics window informed him that he had looked at himself, and this could increase the effectiveness of his magical and spiritual powers by controlling mana absorption. At one point, he felt a pain that was familiar to him. It was muscle pain from rupturing joints. It was as if his biological cells were being destroyed and replaced by transcendent magical power. Now the protein he ate could be directed to the desired places and develop magical power without loss. The installation of the eye scanners was complete. When the ceremony began, they first talked about how there were terrible monsters on the continent of Laniakea, and that the conditions there were too harsh for people to live. Nevertheless, people built cities, and it was possible to develop new land. Thanks to the giants, people felt confident, and the head of the training center, Baron Harun Basio, said that it was time to open the tents. These tents contained 300 training machines, and today, the cadets would have become the happy owners of training giants. He said that although they would receive a real machine for 3 months, there was one thing they needed to know. The training machines were made from used parts, and their performance lagged far behind that of real giants. All the machines were assembled from old parts of varying quality, and the trainees had the opportunity to find the right one. They could very well come across machines in almost perfect condition, and if they could find one like that, they would be inferior to those on the front lines. Black, meanwhile, thought the chief was exaggerating, because no matter how you looked at it, they were just used giants. Harun Basio summed up by saying that the giant that would suit them perfectly was a well-built training machine, and this ceremony was their chance to find a treasure. He said that they could take off as many times as they could manage, but they had to pay attention to the sound during takeoff. The louder it was, the higher the power. The ceremony was to begin in order of the entrance test results, and Helena Yellow was to be first. They began to ask if Kang Go-han wasn't first, but Helena had 45 seconds, and he had 53, and the place was determined by the takeoff time. The head of the center said that a good machine would simplify training and should be chosen carefully. She went to the giants, and the rest had to wait their turn. Stopping in front of one of the giants, Helena thought that it would be impossible to check 300 machines. She only had enough strength for 10 giants, so she decided to choose with her eyes first. Looking at it, she appreciated its clean appearance, good symmetry, simple design, and joints. Harun Basio told Black that Helena seemed very complex, and it was clear at first glance that she was much better than Gerard. Gero's family was famous for its wealth, comparable to that of the nobility, but she was better than him, even though she had an unknown history behind her. Black suggested that she was a natural genius, but the director said that geniuses were always known, like Lowen. Black understood who his favorites were. He replied that he liked kids who not only had talent, but also a history. They were better than others, but still worked hard. He was sure that she would choose an excellent giant, while Helena asked for another takeoff, which was already the 10th. She began the takeoff while evaluating the giant. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but it had excellent proportions. The layout and construction of the armor plates were perfect, which meant they were effective. The joints were also impressive, and it was meticulous work. The sound during takeoff was not only loud, but also constant and stable. Finally, Helena decided that this was the best of the 10. Getting out of the giant and fixing her hair, Helena looked at Kang Go-han with a smirk. Seeing this, the director smiled and said that, as expected, this child was feeling the pressure. He told Black that everyone was looking at his student, Kang Go-han, that he was attracting attention and arousing interest. Kaltz replied that he was not his student. It was Kang Go-han's turn, and when he stepped forward, he thought he was like a trophy that attracted everyone's attention and heard everyone talking about him. He knew that he could not defeat Helena with either his insight or his magical power, and he could only manage 2 or 3 jumps. But he confidently approached the giants because, while watching Helena's takeoffs, he realized that the magical power in his head reacted when he approached a giant. He was sure that he could increase his power without even sitting inside. The more powerful the giant, the stronger his magical power trembled. All he had to do was find a machine that could surpass Helena's giant. But it was difficult, because he couldn't maintain the mirror's ability for long. He didn't have much time, so he started running from machine to machine. Neither the director nor Colt understood why he was running. All the other cadets also ran after him, and when he stopped near one giant, everyone thought he had finally stopped. Colt and Harun Basio also ran after him, and now couldn't catch their breath, thinking that this giant looked normal, and that it was just childishness. But Kongo Han, standing in front of the giant for a while, thought that it was the best because its magical power danced. He had seen this in his past life, with weapons that had the most ordinary parts, but sometimes all the parts fit together perfectly. Then, such a weapon begins to shoot very accurately. You can take it apart and put it back together, but everything will remain perfect because it is a masterpiece. The giant he chose was made only from used parts, but they fit together perfectly. He thought that finding such a combination was like a miracle and began to take off. Everything worked out for him, and when synchronization occurred, it was a completely different sound. Everyone was surprised, and Harkrex couldn't believe that such a thing was possible on the first takeoff. And Helena said it wasn't fair. Coming out of the giant, Kang Gohan happily announced that he was choosing it. But he looked for Sir Kultz, and seeing that he wasn't even looking in his direction, realized that he hadn't surprised him. But smiling, he thought that now he was one step closer. Harun Basio tried to understand what had happened, because the giant looked completely normal. Maybe it was his vision, or luck. Black couldn't understand it either. The director asked Raphael White if he was responsible for the training. He confirmed this. Then, putting his hand on his shoulder, he asked him not to disgrace himself. He whispered that they needed to find out everything, because it could be luck, or a real monster had appeared. Raphael replied that he was prepared for this. The director told him to report on the training personally. Kang Gohan looked at his giant, which was 8.5 meters tall and weighed 15 tons. It was big and powerful. It moved with the help of its body and magical power. And during takeoff, Kang Gohan felt as if they were one. It was what bodybuilders strive for, overwhelming power. And it was an incomparable colossus. He wondered if the others felt the same way. The other cadets supervised the preparation of the selected giants, including oil changes and wiring checks. Looking at the preparation of his giant, Kang Gohan thought that this was not an ordinary machine, but an extended, more powerful body driven by his muscles and strength. One of the workers turned to Kang Gohan and asked if he was the lucky one who would control this giant. She introduced herself as Rin Ingenie, the head of the maintenance team for blocks 1 through 10. He thought that this surname was given to outstanding personalities. Shaking her hand, he introduced himself and said that he was the lucky one. She replied that it was great and that she had seen a very cool giant. It looked ordinary from the outside, but it was amazing. It was an amazing combination of parts for a used giant. She drew his attention to the condition of the armor joints and said that it might even replicate the flexibility of his body. Ren Ingenie believed that its efficiency was about 1/3 higher than other machines. Kang Gohan was very surprised by this. She advised him to be careful with the spoo located on the left side of the abdomen, because if he damaged it, he would lose this ability. The machine could be pushed to 1.5 times its capacity, but it was unlikely that he would achieve this. She thought it was incredible and asked him to treat it with care. The lower part of the giant's abdomen, where the heart was located, was the most important place and could not be damaged. She also said that acceleration was possible, which would give it more power and exceed the capabilities of a normal car by 2 times. Kang Ho-han estimated that its basic performance was 1.5 times greater, plus acceleration twice as fast and power 3 times greater than other cars. Ren Ingenie asked what the giant's name was, or if he would just call it Number 2. Kang Go-han replied that it did have a name and asked to be let go. Of course, he thought about it. And even though he would only be using it for 3 months, it was more than just a machine to him. All the fitness enthusiasts were waiting for Monday and the opening of the gym because of their male pride in their chest muscles. So he gave it the name pectoralis, which meant chest. Soon, training began. Ahead of them was a week of independent basic maneuvering training, and they needed to get to know their giants. Rafal White, who led the training, said that this was the last chance to relax during the training. Kang Go-han tried to accelerate, but the high power was not very good. The weight pressing down on his whole body hit him right in the face. It was as if he had been locked at the bottom of the sea, stunned, and all he could hear was a gurgling scream from the depths of his soul. He tried to fill his muscles with magical power, holding back the horror and scream in his lower abdomen. The giant's enormous weight was like an explosion, and his ferocious fist left a hurricane in its wake. He decided that he would definitely hold back the giant's power. Seeing that Kang Ho-han was not relaxing, Rafal told him not to increase his power so sharply, and to start with lighter exercises and repeat them many times. He said that being able to exert all your strength at once is important, but first you need to develop homeostasis, which will allow you to use it consistently. Kang Ho-han thanked him, but thought that he had already seen the characteristics window. Magical power is like muscles, and in order to grow, you need to lift weights. He needed a weight that he couldn't lift more than 10 times. Faced with such resistance, his magical power would be stimulated. He looked around and, making sure that Rafal had left, decided that he needed to develop his magical power first. Picking up speed again, he thought it felt like riding a bicycle in the highest gear. But giants and riders don't always move the same way. He understood that the movements would slow down if he increased the power, but decided to sit down once. Then, he accelerated to full power. Realizing that he was getting the hang of it, Kang Go-han thought that this was the best training machine. Meanwhile, the other coaches watched another stubborn guy, who was no less stubborn than Kang Go-han. It was Harcrux, and Rafal advised him not to rush, because after that, there would be normal training sessions that would be quite harsh. He replied that then he would work twice as hard during them. Laughing, Rafal said that he was spitting venom and thought that he was offended when he got hit by Garo. Harcrux replied that this was not the case and that he was just curious about the difference and why, if Garo hit him, he was not capable of doing the same. Rafal said that he would have to swallow it if he could. After all, those who ignored him because of his origins would get a double blow. 7 days later, Rafal White gathered all the trainees and said that, as they knew, this place was a selection center. Only those who remained until the end would receive the White surname and officially become cadet riders. Now they would have 4 types of assessments: perseverance, overcoming, fighting, and attitude. Everyone listened carefully as he explained that perseverance was an assessment of how long they were able to fight in a critical situation. Overcoming was the ability to take control of a situation and limit the enemy, whether in defense or attack. Fighting is an assessment of their combat abilities, whether they can leave the enemy no chance to resist. To pass, they needed 60 points in each category, and if they scored 100 points, one category could be removed from the assessment. But Rafal added that he had never seen anyone who could score that high, and he gave the command to start the first training session. First, everyone had to run 1 kilometer to the flag, and then gather together. When Rafal gave the command to start, Garo thought it would be easy. He was confident in his speed, and decided that this time, he would take first place. All the trainees were running at about the same pace when their path was blocked by other giants standing in front of them. Kang Go-han was surprised to see the giant Raphael, who said he had been waiting for this day. He said that they probably thought it would be easy, but the giant possessed godlike strength, and today they would feel the burden that the gods carried. Now they were facing 10 combat giants who were 9 meters taller than the training giants, and they had white knights with them. They began to attack the trainees, and they fell from their blows, but the trainers told them to get up. Kang Go-han thought that the assistants had attacked immediately, and he didn't even think about letting them pass. Some of them began to feel nauseous from the shock of the blows and couldn't even open their eyes. Rafal continued his attack, saying that they couldn't recover and asking if they would just lie there on the battlefield. Pinning one of the training giants to the ground with his foot, he said that all they were capable of was lying there. He asked how long the cadet was going to lie there, and when the cadet tried to get up, he grabbed him and threw him aside. They continued to attack the trainees, telling them to get up and run to the target, otherwise they would be sent home. Kang Ho-han thought that at this rate, they were all headed for complete failure. Garo called them fools and said that they had to read the game and that this test would show how quick-witted and decisive they were. Running away from the battlefield, he decided that it was impossible for the trainees to defeat the White Knights and that he would definitely get the highest score before anyone else. As he ran toward the goal, he thought about how this test would determine who was more agile and quick-witted. Running was also difficult, but fighting the assistants was a waste of time. Finally, he reached the finish line and thought that this time he would take first place. The giant standing at the finish line realized that it was Garo, asked if he was surprised, and announced that everyone else had failed and only he would pass. He said that it was an excellent first place. The giant reached out his hand to him and said it was a touchdown. Gert didn't understand what he was talking about. The giant coach suddenly grabbed the giant Garo and knocked him to the ground. From such a blow, Garo, who was in his giant, began to feel nauseous. The coach hit him and asked where his teammates were, and said that he ran well, apparently imagining himself to be a wild horse, abandoned everyone, and ran away. Grabbing him, he told him to get up, calling him a horse. He said that he had apparently abandoned the team. Garo said that this was not the case, and asked him to wait, but the coach pressed the giant's head into the ground and said that he would grant his wish and that he would have individual training today. On the battlefield, the earth shook, and the instructor's assistants were cruel. Everyone tried to get up, but fell again and rolled over, trying to hold on. There was no way out. It was as if they were stuck in a swamp, and all the trainees were in a panic. Then a voice caught the attention of all the trainees, and Kang Go-han realized that one of them had made a general call. The voice speaking to them asked them to stick together and stand closer to those standing next to them. It was Helena, and she said that they would not win if they fought separately. They would only move forward together. Kang Go-han recognized Helena's voice. This ordinary 17-year-old girl was calming the panic. She paved the way for them with her incredible judgment, leadership qualities, and skill. Helena said that there should be 7 or 8 people per assistant, and then they would have a chance. They needed to stand shoulder to shoulder and push him out. They had to use the power that would become enormous if they came together. If it was difficult, she advised them to grab the assistant's legs and pull him down. So they did, and the assistants didn't understand what was happening. After a while, it became apparent that the trainees were slowly coming together. Helena said that things were getting better and that they should line up in a 5-pointed star. She gave the command to link shoulders in groups of 10 and focus on the center of gravity. Now they had to break through the center, and it was like playing rugby. The rest had to focus on the left and right. Lowen said they would go left. There, they were met by 2 assistants, and it was decided to tie them up on all sides. They succeeded and moved to the other side. Harkrux said they needed to take care of their legs. After all, regardless of the enemy's strength, if they broke his balance, they could win. Seeing his actions, Count Callisto realized that Harkrux was imitating him. He couldn't use all his magical power at once, but he had excellent intuition. And he thought that now it was his turn, because thanks to Helena, the team spirit was beginning to return. But he understood that the formation created by Helena was useless against Raphael, and if they didn't defeat him, they would still lose. Kang Gohan thought that he had to tie him up somehow, and now the middle was open. Seeing that Raphael's stance had been broken, he ran towards him, deciding to throw his entire giant body at him. Seeing him rushing towards him, Raphael turned around and struck the giant Kang Gohan. He said he had been waiting for him and added that he was a joker if he thought he could defeat him a second time. And Raphael, repeating once again that he had indeed been waiting for him, grabbed the giant Kang Gohan and threw him to the ground. Kang Gohan thought that even he, a sergeant in the Korean Reserve Forces, did not understand the meaning of this test. Rafal said to get everyone together, that this was also a team, and their teamwork was evident. From the very beginning, he had no intention of breaking through on his own. Helena, Lo, and Harkrux also thought so, and forming a front line of attack was an important decision. But there was a monster, and if they couldn't defeat Raphael, the whole team would fail. And if the outstanding striker was waiting for him, it would be impossible to catch him off guard. While he was thinking about all this, Kultz Black and the director were watching him. Finally, Kang Ho-han decided that even if he fell by taking a risk, they could try with even greater possibilities. Trying to get up and gather his strength, Kang Ho-han thought he needed to tie up the sheaf. Rafal told him that there was still a debt to be paid. He was going to make a circle and then come back while it recharged. But at that moment, Kang Gohan gathered his strength and grabbed Rafal. Turning around, he said that it turned out he could still move. Holding him by the leg, Kang Gohan replied that of course he could move and began to accelerate. He felt heaviness and pressure and thought that this was great and that if it continued like this, everything would work out. His goal from the very beginning was not to knock Raphael off his feet, and he couldn't let him get away. Raphael tried to brush him off his leg, shouting that if he didn't let go, he would go to the other world. He began kicking the cabin, and pressure and shock began to weigh down on Kang Ho-han's entire body. But he had to protect his lower abdomen at all costs. Kang Gohan's strength was already leaving him, but he convinced himself that he could hold out and that he only needed one more attempt. Raphael understood that he was protecting the lower abdomen, where the vital organs were located, and if he broke such an expensive giant, he would have to pay for the repairs. The other trainees were finally starting to get the hang of it, and Helena commanded them to press the enemy. Assessing the enemy's capabilities, Lowen said that even though they were white, they were far from Raphael, and were already almost exhausted. Helena offered to help Sir Kang Ho-han because Sir Raphael White was no different and needed to be crushed. All the trainees ran to the scene of the battle, but Raphael only laughed at the idea that 70 machines would attack at once. But he said that they had miscalculated, and that while his legs were tied, his hands were not. But at that moment, the giants surrounded him on all sides. Helena commanded everyone to hold their ground and not retreat. And even if one fell, 70 people could continue. It was difficult for Raphael to act with only his hands, but he understood that repairs would cost a pretty penny if he started breaking the giants in half. At one point, he was hit by a flurry of blows, and he thought that such a thing was difficult to predict. After a while, the group of giants reached the flag and rejoiced that they had done it. Meanwhile, Raphael lay defeated and thought that everything had gone wrong and whether it was worth considering it a passing grade. But he decided that he could let them win once because it was only the beginning. Getting up and holding his aching head, he thought that Kang Ho-han was quite interesting and decided to see how far he would go. The other trainees carried the giant Kang Ho-han to the flag in their arms. When he came out, they started shouting that he was incredible because Rafal had beaten him, as if he was going to really destroy him. His mana was almost at 0, and his willpower was also exhausted. But he did it because that monster had almost 15 times more magical power than him. Approaching him, Helena thanked him and said that he had played the most important role. He replied that she shouldn't talk nonsense. He had held him by the legs. He added that she could just call him Kang Gohan, but she replied that there was no way a knight could be called just anything. She considered him a knight with authority, and he could consider it her stubbornness. She barely managed to make 10,000 jumps and was on the verge of collapse, but it was as if she saw his successful 10,001 jump. He said she was wrong to say that, and that she was the main character. But she was afraid, because she personally wasn't risking anything, but she was afraid of avoiding defeat. Before leaving, Helena said that next time, she would be the first to take on the strongest opponent. Then Lowen jumped up to him, hugged him, and asked how he did it. She couldn't believe that he could stand up to Raphael, even though he was holding back. Harkrux also approached them, introduced himself, and said that he wanted to say hello, and that he was impressed. Extending his hand, Kang Gohan said he was pleased to meet him and that he had seen how coolly he had knocked down his assistant. Meanwhile, Rafal White scolded his assistants, telling them to get ready. They had been training for 2 years, and how could they call themselves white knights? He said he had allowed them to win, but they had lost. It was a program designed to destroy their spirit, but they let them perk up so easily. Sending them off to prepare, he thought that in any case, it would be even more fun now to clip the wings of the newly invigorated novices. Turning to the trainees, he asked if they had rested enough, as it was time to climb into the giants. Hearing this, the trainees even thought it was a joke. Kang Ho-han asked how that could be, since everything was on the line now. Someone couldn't even get up. And Jiro said that he had already admitted he was wrong and was afraid they would beat him again. Already in the giant, Rafal said that they were wrong to think it was over because they hadn't even started yet. When Kang Ho-han climbed into his giant, he repeated angrily that this was wrong. Then he saw another trainee lying on the ground in the giant, clearly feeling ill. The coach chose another place to plant the flag and told everyone to run. And so, when the goal was achieved, they returned to the opposite side, and the cycle repeated itself endlessly. When another person lost consciousness and was carried away on a stretcher, Rafal said that they needed to go and sleep and give up on the perseverance points. Watching this, Kang Ho-han thought that it didn't look like training at all, but rather like torture. He understood that this way, their muscles and strength would not grow, and their recovery and development speed would decrease. But the instructor's assistants were not going to stop. They fell, and Rafal shouted at them to get up or think that money was being wasted on them. He said that this machine was a god. But did it really seem like a god in their current state? And how could they call themselves riders if they couldn't even hold their weight? At that moment, Kang Ho-han thought that they were the ones slowing down their development. Seeing Harcrux struggling to get up, he helped him, and Harcrux thanked him. He moved on, saying that they needed to go faster. Kang Ho-han thought that instead of increasing their magical power, they were doing aerobics. Meanwhile, Rafal grabbed one of the giants and said that it wasn't enough to send him to the other world, so he had to get up and run. Hearing this, Kang Ho-han thought that only a few people could overcome this and become stronger, and only those who were born strong. But it seemed that this was their goal, to leave only those who were strong from birth, and he wondered why they needed a training center. Meanwhile, Rafal White assessed the situation and realized that there were about 15 people left. Then, seeing Kang Ho-han standing nearby, he asked what he was doing, apparently plotting something again. But Kang Ho-han, thinking that he didn't want selection, but development, canceled the synchronization. The synchronization with the giant was canceled, and Kang Ho-han's giant collapsed to the ground. Thinking he was joking, Rafal approached him and told him to get up, but he did not get up. After a while, when he woke up in his bed, he saw that his magical power was 204, and Kang Ho-han thought that was great. Looking at the characteristics window, he smiled, thinking that everything was right for muscle growth and magical power, and that normal rest was necessary. Getting out of bed, he realized that he had slept for only an hour, and his magical power had increased by 1 unit. That was enough to pass the training center selection. But he decided not to follow the illiterate training plan. After all, if you train correctly, you can accelerate your development 3 or 4 times over. And when he finished training, he laughed because he needed to replenish his dark mana and get some good rest. At that moment, Cult's Black entered Kang Ho-han's tent and, seeing him laughing, asked what was so funny. He reminded him that he had said he would surprise him, and Kang Ho-han apparently decided to shock him like this. Not knowing what to say, Kang Ho-han hesitated a little and then asked him to wait a little longer. Cult's Black asked if he was going to return to the training ground, but he replied that he would eat and go to sleep. His answer stunned Sir Cows, who asked what he was thinking. Kang Ho-han said that if he wanted to eat goblin meat, he should come. 2 weeks later, while everyone else was training, Kang Ho-han sat and cooked meat. Davis asked what he was thinking. Davis felt that everyone was looking at them with pity and was afraid of getting indigestion, but he said it was better to chew than to worry. He added that Davis had training with him today. He wanted him to become a renowned squire. Therefore, he had to have basic skills. Looking at the others, he said that there was a certain path to developing transcendental energy, but the instructor's assistants were leading them in a different direction. The injured were being carried away again, and he said that the instability rating after the absences could be compensated for by scoring 80 on other criteria, and he decided to take a risk, to embark on the path of raising his magical power to the highest level, rather than following a stable path to the end of his training. To do this, he needed to eat, because magical power required food. Kang Ho-han felt full just looking at Davis eat it. He saw his strength and magical power grow, and it was not perseverance, but science. Finally getting up from the table, Kang Ho-han said that they needed to digest everything and go to evening self-training. By this time, the training was over, and the trainees decided it was time to eat on the way, discussing that today had not been easy for them either. Then they saw Kang Ho-han stretching, and thought that after eating, he was going to rest again, not understanding what was going on. One of the trainees said that those who had been eliminated in the selection process were no longer being touched. Another replied that sighing and idling was much easier. They discussed that they could be kicked out of the training center for this, and what was wrong with him. Hearing this, Garrot was glad that the opinion of him had changed. The director, who was watching Kang Ho-han from the window, said that a promising genius had turned into a hopeless slacker in 1 morning. He added that he had great talent and was a great giant, but if his soul was rotten, it would have to be discarded. In the evening, he and Davis trained. Kang Ho-han showed how to bend and straighten the knees while gradually increasing the number of repetitions. Meanwhile, Kang Ho-han decided to resume his core training. When Davis saw this, he snorted and said that if anyone saw him, they they would scold him 3 times as hard. He thought Kang Ho-han was just lying there, breathing, but he replied that it was an exercise for the diaphragm to increase pressure in the abdominal cavity. He said that thanks to this, you can lift heavy things and avoid injuries. Physical abilities will improve, and you will be able to control your mana. At that moment, Lowen ran into the tent and asked if he had heard what they were saying. But then, seeing his training, she asked what he was doing. Angry, she said she thought he had important training, but it was just breathing exercises. She added that a personal evaluation schedule had appeared. She said it would be an elimination mission, and those who failed could be excluded. The instructor's assistants targeted him. Meanwhile, the director decided to find out from Raphael what he thought about this mission and Kang Go-han. He replied that he was sure that most of the cadets would receive poor evaluations, and some instructors see this as an opportunity to kick them out. But Harun Basio asked him not to talk about the others and to say what he himself thought. After a short pause, Raphael said that he did not think this guy would lose to anyone. The director said that this was the problem, as he thought that he would lose consciousness at least once. He cannot be denied his talent, but he is still from a poor family. He added that everything would become clear within the next 15 days because this kid was deliberately avoiding their training. It was hard for him to bear that he seemed to be laughing at their time-tested training program, and he said that no matter what, he wanted to expel him. Rafal was very surprised by this decision. He told Black that growth potential was a very important indicator, but the one who fought for first and second place ended up in 15th, and that was not good. He asked Kultz what he thought about it and how he allowed a boy who had restored his passion to get to this point. Kultz Black replied that he could do as he saw fit. Rafal was even more shocked to hear this. Harun Basio clarified that he meant that he could be expelled or that the boy could still prove himself. He replied that he didn't think so, because Kang Go-han turned out to be lazy, and he should do as he saw fit. And if the kid couldn't surprise the head, that would be the end of it. At the end of the conversation, the director asked if they didn't think it was all very strange. Soon, all the cadets gathered at the training ground for the first round of preliminary selection. Rafal said that all 78 people would fight at the same time, and 14 of them would be eliminated. The remaining 64 people would be divided into 2 groups and fight in a tournament battle. The longer they lasted, the higher their score would be. The trainees listened attentively when he said that the rules of the battle were simple. If the back of their giant touched the ground, they would be eliminated. He also said that they could attack him in groups, which surprised some of the cadets. But if they fought one-on-one with an opponent and defeated him, they would receive extra points. For those who had no friends or luck in one-on-one competitions, they had prepared a method of unconditional assessment. Cadets dissatisfied with their scores could request a one-on-one battle with the instructor, and they would receive a score depending on how long they could hold out. Hearing this, Lowen said that he was simply telling them not to complain. After all, how could they survive a one-on-one battle with an instructor? Finally, Raffle White ordered all the cadets to line up, and they did so. Garo thought about why he shouldn't provoke the whole line, and what to do with Kang Go-han. Meanwhile, the others thought it would be difficult to get through the first round of preliminary selection, and whether they would be able to win if several people attacked at once. Jiro asked if it would be fair to eliminate the one who was drinking juice, while everyone else was training. Another cadet supported him, saying that they would gain an advantage if they eliminated one of the best. Another said that Kang Go-han rested every day simply because he was talented, and that he was useless to the team. They called him the most worthless outcast, and believed that if they got together like before, they would defeat him as instructors. Kang Ho-han thought that he had expected contempt and hostility from the very beginning. And there was only one way to prove that he was not wrong. Lowen contacted him via a private line. She asked if it was true that he was losing points for persistence and was going to compensate for them with other points. And if so, was he really that confident in his own training methods? But then she said that now was not the time, that there were many enemies around, and that he risked being eliminated in the first round. And she decided to fight alongside him. She said that when it all started, he should stand behind her. Kang Go-han smiled and called her a friend, saying that she would be in danger then. But she just laughed and said that she was Miss Lowen, a person with slightly intimidating skills from the training camp. At that moment, Harcrux joined their conversation, saying that it was unfair that everyone was targeting him alone. He said that regardless of what he had been doing these days, his skills were amazing. So he decided to help him in the first round and get good points. Kang Go-han replied that he was fine and that they shouldn't worry about him, but they objected, saying that he was crazy and that he was alone. Meanwhile, Rafal wished everyone good luck, gave the command to start, and Kang Go-han's opponents began to approach him. They asked if he knew how hard they had trained, while he was entertaining himself alone. He replied that they could attack him, and that he had magical powers capable of overcoming human limitations and maximizing muscle compatibility. The giant rider is magical power from start to finish, and if they don't have it, it's impossible to move the giant or cause an explosion. He added that by using magical power correctly, one can use the giant correctly, right down to the bones. Kang Ho-han maximized the pressure in his upper abdomen. The giant began to come into contact with the magic of his body. All this time, he had been focused on his abdomen and back, and the core is the starting point for athletic skills. Saying that the core gives strength to the fists and produces massive and rigid power, he struck one of his opponents. The opponent flew far to the side, and Kang Ho-han thought that he now had his first extra point. His strong body allowed him to easily and quickly shift his center of gravity, so he flew like a butterfly and stung like a bee. Attacking another opponent, he said that he had a weak core, so he was easy to defeat. He struck another blow and the opponent was defeated, and Kang Go-han said that this was another extra point. The other cadets did not understand how it was possible to possess such strength without even training normally. Kang Go-han thought that, with the exception of rich and free guys like Garrot and Helena, the magical power of the rest ranged from 120 to 150. His magical power surpassed that of the other cadets. And when you consider his ability to use magical power, there was no one here who could match him. And he decided to show the other cadets what real training was. The second part of the tournament was a battle of endurance. They were divided into two groups, but only 2 participants were to receive the highest score. Kang Go-han thought that, as he had expected, this tournament would be tough, and the first round required endurance. In this round, to get the highest score, you had to defeat 5 opponents. At that moment, one of the cadets called him an idiot and asked him where he was looking. Preparing for the attack, he said that it didn't matter how good he was because they were of the same origin. He added that he wouldn't even make it to the quarterfinals. Kang Ho-han stood completely still when his opponent struck him in the chest and did not even move. Very surprised by this reaction, his opponent thought he had missed. Kang Ho-kang said that his blows were weak because he couldn't keep his balance. He rushed into the attack and knocked his opponent to the ground with his first blow. Rejoicing in his victory, he said that it was all because his opponent had a weak core. Watching the battle, Rafal asked Black how far he thought Kang Go-han would go. He replied that he would probably reach 4th or 5th place. He was surprised that he would go so far, since the best cadets trained for 5 years, and wondered if there was too big a gap in their magical power. Black replied that he had a huge gap in magic with the white rank, but someone like that got punched in the face by him and seemed to start remembering who it was. He admitted that he always achieved results that exceeded expectations, and it was worth noting that his pectoralis was an outstanding giant. Still, he believed that it must be difficult for him to deal with guys who were born free and also had enormous talent. In the 16th round, Kang Go-han attacked another opponent, saying that it was because of people like him that the poor were despised. His opponent hit him, but he didn't even flinch, and only said that it seemed to be his turn now. He delivered a crushing blow on the first try, and won again. Rubbing his hand, he asked how long they were going to call him a beggar. No matter what his status was, he was still a knight. The instructor's assistants were surprised that Kang Go-han was in the quarterfinals, but they believed that when he faced the freest fighters, he would feel the gap in strength. At that moment, Jiro won his match against his opponent, Harcrux. Rafal thought that this guy was very diligent, and that he was unlucky to face Garrot right away. As he expected, the guys from the lower classes don't evaluate very fairly, because they only recently felt the magic within themselves. Turning around, he noticed Kang Go-han fighting another cadet. He was surprised, and wondered if his opponent was one of the free guys. His opponent said how could he say that, because he was just lucky to have chosen a good giant. At that moment, Rafal realized that it was not about the difference between the giants, but about control. The giant's defense was strengthened by excellent control skills, but he didn't understand how he had already mastered such a level of control, and now he was roughly at the level of the assistants. Looking back at them, he thought that they themselves didn't see this, but were simply annoyed and despised him. And they were angry because he didn't want to follow their program and did everything his own way. Meanwhile, Kang Go-han easily withstood a blow from another opponent and said that now it was his turn. He struck a blow, and the opponent flew to the side and fell, and Rafal, who was watching them, wondered how this was even possible. And at that moment, he realized that it was all because Kang Go-han was not following the program. When the final of the first group started, Helena faced Lowen. After 6 blows, they were both still able to fight, as expected of aces. Looking at them, Davis said that, as he thought, the Free Knights had a completely different level of fighting skills, and these two had equal skills. But Cult's Black objected, saying that Helena had not yet shown her full potential. She put pressure on Lowen, but Lowen held her own. Meanwhile, Lowen wondered about Helena's origins. Helena acknowledged that she was a good opponent, but Miss Lowen Yellow's magical power seemed to be running out. Preparing to attack, she said that unfortunately, her opponent was finished for today and struck a blow. Everyone saw that she pushed her back 3 steps and wondered how she still had so much strength left. And so Helena won the final of the first group. This was followed by the final of the second group. Garrot, who faced Kang Go-han in the final, said that today he would teach him a lesson so that he would not even dare to think of rising above him. Calling up the characteristics window, Kang Go-han assessed his opponent's abilities. His magical power was 675. Garrot's power was twice as great, and his combat skills were also amazing. Objectively, he was an opponent that Kang Go-han could not defeat. He had to challenge himself to lift a PM weight that could only be lifted once with all his strength. Kang Go-han would have to challenge himself to lift a weight he had never lifted before and never thought he would lift. But he decided that today he would go beyond his limits and surprise everyone and began to accelerate. He decided to give it a try, and when Garou saw him accelerating, he thought that, as he had expected, he even had a different posture. The concentration of his magical power was simply incredible, but Kang Ho Han was not going to give up and strained even harder. But Garou attacked, hitting him in the chest, and Kang Ho Han even staggered from the blow. Rejoicing at this, Garou called him a pathetic beggar and said that he did not belong here. He attacked him again, but Kang Ho Han stood his ground, saying that this was his place. The coach's assistants realized that he would endure because he was able to perfectly block the blow. Kang Ho Han thought that no matter who he was in his past life and how poor he was in this one, it was all in the past. His future began here, and he decided that no matter what anyone said, he would leave a mark of Kang Ho Han's existence. He wanted to surprise everyone in his own way and leave his mark here and now. While the instructors watched their battle, he thought that this was his life and his land, where he had put down roots. He wanted to surprise even Garou, who hated him, and leave a mark of his existence here and now. Finally gathering his strength, Kang Ho Han prepared to attack, saying that now it was his turn. Meanwhile, Raphael White thought about how he considered himself the best, silently swallowing any pain. He thought he would be sent to the group of pioneers. Only the best riders were in this group, but for several years now, he had been stuck in the training group. He reached his limit again and again, and thought it was because he wasn't trying hard enough. But now, looking at Kang Ho Han, he thought that this brat was breaking all the rules he considered best, and seemed to avoid any pain. Moreover, he grew up in the same poverty as Raphael himself, but showed faster growth results than anyone else, and he didn't understand why. Kang Ho Han, meanwhile, shouted that it was his turn, and began to accelerate. And even though Garou's magical power was higher, he could still gather more magical power at a time than him. His acceleration doubled his performance, and Kang Ho Han squeezed magical power out of his entire body, as if challenging him to a one-on-one fight. All his power was now concentrated in his fist. Kang Ho Han delivered a powerful blow to the giant Garou, who began to stagger. At first, Kang Ho Han saw his opponent lean, but he managed to stay on his feet. Garou, enraged, said that a dog like him could not defeat him. And again rushing into the attack, he said that now he would put an end to this. He struck Kang Ho Han so hard that the coaches watching them felt the shockwave. But Kang Ho Han blocked the blow again, which could be considered a victory. However, he himself considered it a defeat if he couldn't knock him down this time. He had to concentrate, become even heavier and stronger, and put everything into the last blow. Kang Ho Han rushed into the attack, mentally asking for the strength to knock him down. He delivered another powerful blow to the giant Garou, but he was still standing. Seeing this, Kang Ho Han was very surprised that Garou had withstood this as well. Now he had no strength left to hold on. He thought he could defeat him if he landed a good blow, but apparently he had overestimated himself. Garou, enraged, said that he would never fall at his hands. Adding that now the real end had come, he began his attack on Kang Ho Han. But Kang Ho Han had no intention of giving up, and even if he had no magical power left, he decided to hold on with his willpower until the very end. Kang Ho Han was already prepared for his opponent's attack and closed his eyes, but nothing happened. So he opened them slightly to look. He saw the giant Garou standing in front of him with his fist raised, but he wasn't moving. Lowen, who was watching their battle, saw that he had stopped and didn't understand why. The coach's assistants looked at the surveillance camera and saw that Garou seemed to have lost consciousness. When Kang Ho Han realized that it was over, he breathed a sigh of relief and said that he had done it. He climbed out of the giant, and at that moment, Raphael White approached him and called his name. Raphael said that he had become incredibly strong in a short period of time, but he didn't understand how it happened because he hadn't really trained. He replied that he had simply made a choice. He chose the best method using scientific analysis, suitable for training and rest time. He added that they were knights, practically aristocrats, and said that they could make their own choices and take responsibility for them. He left, and Raphael remained standing there, thinking that he was also a knight and that he had forgotten about it, or perhaps had become too accustomed to it. He wanted to become stronger, but what had he been doing all this time? And was he the best? Or was he just ignorant, following established training methods? Kang Ho Han was able to find the best method, but he was unable to overcome his limits because he followed the familiar path. And perhaps he was not a knight, but just a fighter. Looking after Kang Ho Han, he realized that Kang Ho Han was paving his own way without relying on others. And today, he learned a lesson. And he was glad that the name Kang Ho Han, which did not exist, was gradually becoming remembered in the kingdom of Rheinkall on the continent of Laniakea. Hearing that Kang Ho Han had the best score, the director said that now they couldn't just expel him, but they couldn't continue to turn a blind eye to him either. He decided to call an emergency meeting and asked Raphael to bring Kang Ho Han yellow. After a while, Kang Ho Han was standing in front of the director and staring at him silently for a while. But then he slammed his fist on the table and said that from now on, there would be no exceptions for training. Kang Ho Han didn't understand why he was saying that. He wondered whether he should lie, but then told the head that he wanted to graduate from the training center as number 1. The head replied that a brat who did things his own way would not be in first place. But Kang Ho Han objected that following their training would also make it impossible. And all because there was a difference of almost 5 years between him, a former beggar, and the cadets, who were free citizens. The director said that this was true, and that a cadet who grew up in poverty had never taken first place. He asked if he would remain in first place by doing things his own way. He replied that he would. Then, the director got angry, stood up, and said that he was shameless for looking at the training camp program that way. Turning away, he thought that Kang Go-han was like a cockroach that would not die even if stepped on. At that moment, Cults Black coughed meaningfully, and the director, coming to his senses, said that since it was the knight's choice, he respected it. He told Raphael that they would now support Kang Go-han in his training, and if they start talking, he should say that it is an order from the head. But he must take responsibility, and his attitude rating will be 0. And he knows better than anyone what to do to become #1 with such a score. The director said that this was an unprecedented case, so he must not disappoint him. Adding that he did not want to see him, he asked him to leave. Harun Basio thought that he didn't want to be #1, and how he was going to graduate from the center with a 0 attitude score. And he asked Cults what he thought. He replied that it was usually impossible, but everything that was happening now was very unusual. Later, Kang Ho-han trained, and now that he had strengthened his core and his upper and lower body were balanced, he needed to feel the magical power. Cults Black came to him and said that, in fact, if his relationship score was 0, it was impossible to graduate from the training center. He said that he would have to score more than 60 points on the other items. Kang Go-han replied that there were additional points. Black said that it was true, that it was about overcoming and fighting, but how was he going to get 90 points for perseverance if he skipped training? Davis said that if he scored 100 points, he would be exempt from one criterion. Black replied that only 2 cadets had managed to score 100 points. Saying that now was the most important part, Kang Go-han made a leap, but he was so exhausted that he couldn't lift it again. Throwing the barbell on the floor, he asked Sir Cults how much it weighed. He replied that it was about 300 pounds. Kang Go-han said that last week he lifted a barbell weighing 250 pounds 10 times, and now 10 times with 300 pounds. Black confirmed this. Then Kang Go-han asked if he still needed an answer. He said that his path was uncertain and dangerous, but the reward was greater. Black replied that he didn't even know why he was worried about him. Kang Go-han asked if it wouldn't be better for him to take the difficult path in order to truly surprise Sir Black. In any case, in order to survive, he needed to continue to take first and second place in the rankings. The final assessment would be especially important. Kang Ho-han asked him about the final assessment. Black said that it was a real reconnaissance mission outside the training center. If he proved himself outside the center, he would receive extra points. But this mission was very dangerous because they would encounter real monsters. After listening to him, Kang Go-han said that he needed to go and strengthen his chest muscles. Black said that he wasn't listening to him at all. Starting training again, he said that he needed to focus, which was the best thing he could do right now. He began doing chest presses, which were great for building chest muscles. After 3 months, he had almost caught up with Lowen in terms of magical power. And by mobilizing all his magical power at once, he could easily defeat Helena, the best in the center. But as the amount of magical power increased, it became more difficult to use it all at once. As for his ability to use this power, he was unmatched even among the assistants. Initially, the streams of magical power seemed like thin threads to him, but now they had thick and clear outlines. He became 5th in points and 5th in the rankings, and now nothing could scare him. The assistants who watched his training did not understand how he could become so strong. He lifted very heavy barbells 10 times. One of them said that even if he tried 100 times, he would not be able to use his strength and would simply fall. But he used all of it 10 times. Another said that perhaps he had a special body structure, but he suggested that he was probably a genius. After finishing his training, Kang Go-han thought that now he was ready, because tomorrow would finally be the final evaluation. He couldn't wait for the moment when he would go out into the world beyond the training center. The next day, the final test began, a reconnaissance mission outside the training center in an area where humans cannot live. Raphael said that the mission had 2 objectives, training and reconnaissance of the area. Outside all areas, there were places that contained a core, and these anomalies disappeared after the core was destroyed. On the left was a reverse gravity zone, and because of the crazy gravity, it was impossible to enter. But they didn't send cadets on such dangerous missions. The place they were going to explore was on the right, and was called the Monster Forest. The anomalies in this forest were at a medium level. The trees there sometimes twisted and took on the shape of monsters, as well as changing their location. In the center of the forest was a huge tree, and they assumed that the core was nearby. But their mission would only take place on the outskirts, and the more monsters they destroyed, and the more territory they explored, the higher their score would be. Each time they entered new territory, the Giant's SPU would give them data on the surrounding areas and the monsters located there. In addition, each of their battles would be recorded on the Giant's recording device. Raphael said that 25 assistants had been assigned to ensure their safety, and that in case of an emergency, they should follow their instructions. He wished the cadets luck, and they set off into the forest of monsters, armed. Kang Go-han walked ahead, completely confident in his strength, thinking that the time had finally come. At that moment, a giant ran past him and bumped into him with his shoulder. It was Helena, who said that this time, victory would definitely be hers. He continued on, and then another giant ran past him, bumping into him again. It was Harcrux, who suggested that they complete the mission together and meet in the center. Then Lowen ran up to him and asked if he was ready to show something interesting this time to earn 100 points, and wished him luck. Smiling, he thought that when he was poor, his impressions of life in this world were terrible. But now it seemed to him that he was truly living. He suggested that his friends proceed step by step without breaking the instructions and act cautiously, but he wanted to speed up the process a little. Kang Go-han wanted not only to peel the apple, but also to look into its very core to see the seeds. But going there alone was dangerous, so he asked if they would go with him. Everyone was silent for a while, and he thought they had rejected him. Joining the conversation, Helena said she couldn't stay behind, so they had to go together. Lowen also happily agreed to this proposal, saying that it would be fun and a team effort. Harcrux also agreed, as it was an honor for him to join the team. They decided to stay apart at first and explore their own part of the territory. Then, at the right moment, they would gather and go to the center together. The trees in this forest were twice as tall as giants, but thanks to the SPU, it was possible to scan the surrounding area. Kang Go-han moved further and further away and had a strange feeling. Even though there was no wind, the branches were really moving. All the trees looked amazing, like trolls or stone giants. Kang Go-han was walking through this forest when suddenly he heard a rustling sound behind him and saw something flash by. He turned around to see what it was, but saw nothing. Soon, the noise was heard again, but this time from the front. He began to ask who was there and where they were. Then, activating the SPU system, he realized that there were 3 orcs in front of him. Calling up the information window, he read that the magical power of one such orc was 1,800 PM. He thought that the orc had 3 times more magical power than he did. And what's more, there were 3 of them here. It was scary to even imagine fighting these monsters in his normal body. But now that he was in a giant 8.5 meters tall, they were like neighborhood punks to him. He watched them. The orcs were in no hurry to attack him, but they didn't run away either. Monsters are creatures created from the blood and flesh of ancient gods, but their instinct for destruction borders on madness. Preparing to attack, Kang Ho-han thought it was time to begin his giant's first hunt. He rushed towards his enemies, and the orcs, seeing the giant running towards them, immediately began to flee. But they did not manage to escape, and Kang Ho-han grabbed one of them and threw him aside with force. 2 other orcs immediately attacked him from behind, but he noticed them in time and turned around. But then, something incredible happened. The sensory processing device activated, and it felt as if the orcs had simply frozen in midair. Then, Kang Go-han said that this time, it was his turn to attack the orcs, sending them to the other world. When it was all over, he thought that this was the greatest weapon of humanity. Only with the help of the giants was humanity, suffering from helplessness, able to take the initiative for the first time and break out beyond its territories. He became curious. If the used giants were so good, what kind of power did the highest level giants on the front lines possess? Lowen said over the radio that she had caught 2 orcs and was having fun here. Helena exhaled and also reported that everything was going well in her sector. And Harcrux couldn't even describe his emotions. Now he understood what overwhelming power meant. Kang Go-han suggested speeding up and closing the distance between them, and then seeing what kind of monsters lived in the very center. He began to accelerate gravity, and the pressure of acceleration could be felt in life. As the power increased, the giant began to move faster. At that moment, the giant's rider felt a pleasant pressure throughout his body, and when the pressure peaked, he had a great feeling of speed. Suddenly, Kang Go-han stopped abruptly. As he had expected, the deeper you go, the more monsters there are. And now, 5 goblins were quickly approaching him. Looking at them, he thought that he hadn't seen them in a long time. But what could he do, since today he was not in his usual body? Calling one of the goblins a fatso, he said he would make him his left hand, then swung and hit them so hard that the goblins flew away. Grabbing several goblins at once, he threw them to the ground with tremendous force, sending them to the other world. And he thought to himself that it was too easy. At that moment, the giant's SPU reported that someone was behind him, and Kang Go-han thought it was another monster. He looked closely and saw a 6-meter-tall stone giant approaching him from behind the trees. Before he could think that this was great and that they had finally met, the stone giant rushed at him to attack. Deciding that this should be enough, he kicked it, saying that now it would feel the power of his blow. The monster flew back and hit a tree, breaking it, but it remained unharmed and now roared with anger. Then Kang Go-han said that they could play a game of who was who in a past life. He prepared his weapon and said that the monster could come and get hit by athlete Kang Ho-han's bat. He struck the stone giant with his weapon, and it flew away and fell to the ground. Watching this, he thought that thanks to the giant, he had perfected his home run. But the fun was over, and it was time to finish. So he ran towards his opponent, lying on the ground. He dealt him a crushing blow, saying that nothing could stop the giant. Kang Ho-han met not only his giant, but all the others, as his friends were also successfully dealing with the monsters. After defeating them, they were going to break through into the depths of the forest. It was already getting dark, and Kang Ho-han was walking through the forest, thinking about how huge it was. At that moment, a general message came in that there were about 20 orcs nearby. Kang Gohan thought that everything was as expected and that there would be even more medium and large monsters. Then, from the thick trees, a signal was heard that someone surrounded by ogres was requesting support. But then there was a noise from behind the trees, and Kang Gohan peered through and thought that there were monsters on that side too. Ogres began to approach him from behind the trees, and he said that now they had met. But this time, 5 ogres were approaching him, ready to attack, and that wasn't all. He thought that he wasn't afraid at all and didn't know what had happened there. But he decided to deal with these monsters first, and then think about it. The ogre stood in front of him. His magical power was 15,000 PM. But he wasn't used to seeing them like this. The ogre they had encountered on their way to the training center possessed enormous strength. He was like an elemental force that was impossible to resist. Looking at the ogre, Kang Gohan thought that the situation was completely different now. He was like half of the giant pectoralis, about 1/8 of his weight. Kang Gohan decided to try and struck the ogre with his weapon, but was confused when he realized that the ogre had tensed his muscles and withstood the blow. He didn't understand why, since they weren't strong enough to withstand it, and struck again. But the ogre only dropped to one knee, and Kang Gohan was very surprised that he hadn't been sent to the other world. Thanks to the development of his magical power, it exceeded human power by 49 PM, but the ogre's power was 9,500. He thought about how it was pointless to even compare humans and ogres. This monster was so strong that it could withstand the blows of a giant. Thanks to SPU, he could see their movements as if in slow motion, but it was impossible to stop the simultaneous attack of a dozen ogres. He convinced himself that he could do it. He just had to try, and began to accelerate. Kang Ho Han's giant ran towards the ogres, scattering them in different directions. At one point, he sensed that an ogre was about to attack him from behind, so he turned around, grabbed it, and lifted it off the ground. Seeing the remains of a tree sticking out of the ground, he threw the ogre at it, sending it to the other world. But then, another monster ran up behind him, grabbed him, and tried to lift him up. He couldn't do it, and Kang Ho Han said that he wouldn't be able to knock him down. Taking out his weapon, he turned around and struck the ogre who was holding him. Now he had to deal with the remaining orcs, who also rushed into the attack, but he quickly scattered them with his weapon. However, one of the orcs managed to throw his weapon at the giant and hit him right in the arm. Pulling the weapon out of the giant, Kang Gohan felt a slight pain, but saw that he was done here. He wanted to know what was happening in other areas, because for an ordinary cadet, fighting 5 ogres could be an impossible task. But then, one of the assistants reported that a sudden anomaly was occurring, and everyone needed to stop the mission immediately. Something strange was happening, and everyone needed to retreat. Assistants were sent to support those in need, and everyone had to leave the forest. While all this was being communicated, one of the assistants looked at the screen and realized that the forest had begun to move. Kang Gohan saw that the trees were moving, and their roots were being torn from the ground, and he did not understand what was happening. He heard that someone couldn't find their way, that someone was surrounded by monsters, and that the trees were attacking. He thought that this was the world outside the inhabited zone. He wondered if the trees were changing the terrain, which would render the maps they had scanned useless and retreating a difficult task. After transmitting that it was Kang Gohan, he asked those who could hear him to respond. There was a long silence, and he thought that no one was around. But then, Helena responded, saying that she had heard the message. Then, Lowen and Harkooks came on the line and said that they had sent 30 ogres to the other world. Kang Gohan smiled, realizing that everything was fine. He told his friends that even escaping from here would be difficult, because the monsters had them surrounded, and even the communication was almost cut off. Lowen said that maybe they could get out of here by working together. He replied that maybe they could do it if they gathered in one place. Helena believed that if they got lost because the trees were changing the terrain, they would not be able to meet up and would end up completely isolated, which was dangerous. Harkrux asked in fear if there was really no way out. But Kang Gohan said that there was one place left that would never change its location. It was a giant tree in the center. He suggested meeting there to destroy the core and conquer these territories. He considered it the only way out. The core was the cause of the anomaly outside the area, and if they destroyed the core, they would be able to neutralize the anomalous phenomena. Helena suggested that now that all the monsters from the center of the forest have moved to the outskirts, it would be calmer there. But Lowen was frightened because it was a dangerous place, and their original task was to explore the area on the edge of the forest. Kang Gohan said that it was more dangerous to wander blindly through the forest. The tree in the center was visible from anywhere, and it was best to move deeper into the forest using it as a guide. Harkrux agreed with him and suggested that they gather first and then think everything through. After all, if the 4 giants got together, they would be difficult to defeat. In the end, they agreed to meet in the center and set off. As Kang Ho Han walked through the forest, he was attacked by tree roots that burst out of the ground, and he barely managed to cope with them. At one point, a huge root, more like a tentacle, reached out to grab him, but he noticed it in time. Kang Ho Han tried to attack it, realizing that the forest wanted them to retreat. But he couldn't give up here, so he activated his speed boost. Gaining momentum, the giant Kang Ho Han ran faster through the forest, watching his target on the radar. But suddenly, he sensed an almost inaudible movement from one side. Another giant was approaching him from that side, and he realized it was Helena. He was glad to find her, and she was also happy that they had finally met. Kang Ho Han said that was great, and that they must all be quite close, and asked where the others were. Then another giant emerged from the thicket of the forest. It was Lowen, who waved at them and said she was there. When Kang Gohan saw her, He didn't even have time to say a word before she jumped on him and hugged him, saying she missed him. Surprised, he shouted, asking what she was doing and that if she attacked so suddenly, she would dent his armor plates. Angered, she replied that it was not an attack, but a hug of joy. After all, they were in a dangerous forest, but they managed to meet, and he was worried about his armor. At that moment, Horcrux ran up and said that he had arrived, but was a little disappointed to realize that he was in last place again. Finally, they all met and discussed how hard they had tried. Lowen asked what had happened. It seems that the forest was controlling all these monsters, but Helena said that despite this, the closer they got to the center, the calmer it became. It seemed that the monsters had gone to the outskirts and were destroyed there. Kang Gohan objected that it was too early to feel safe because his SPU had detected movement. In the very center of the forest, the trees were moving forward, and behind them, the monsters were closing in. Fortunately, the trees were slow, and he said they could break through if they moved quickly at maximum speed. He added that if they could destroy the core, they could save their comrades, and began to accelerate to end this story. But the deeper the cadets went, the crazier the forest became, and they had to fight the trees. At one point, Kang Ho Han heard loud noises, and looking over, thought it was a troll. But it was a tree monster very similar to a troll, and it was huge. Kang Gohan was going to grab it and knock it down. And if it lost its balance, everyone would have to pounce on the branches. He ran up, knocked the monster to the ground, and began to beat it with his fists. Helena was already rushing to his aid with her weapon, and he told her to send it to the other world. She swung her weapon and split the huge tree monster in two. Seeing this, Kang Gohan was surprised and wondered where she had learned to use a weapon so well. They all saw that the tree monster was bleeding, and Helena realized that they were all trying to catch and eat them. Kang Ho Han suggested increasing their speed, saying that if they slowed down, they would end up like the tree. They quickly ran on, but soon he told everyone to stop. Looking up, he thought it was snowing, but didn't understand why. But when they all looked closely, they realized it wasn't snow, but pollen. Covering her face, Lowen asked if this pollen controlled the monsters, and if they would be okay. Helena replied that the giant's defense systems would not let the pollen through. Besides, there was only a little of it, and it had apparently started to appear not long ago. At that moment, Horcrux saw a strange glow between the trees and pointed it out to the others. Looking in that direction, they did indeed see some lights and decided to go and take a look. Making their way through the trees, they came out into a clearing and saw a huge tree in front of them and realized that this was the heart of the monster forest. Seeing this tree, Lowen said in surprise that the trunk was indeed wide. Even if their giants joined hands, they would not be able to completely encircle it. Horcrux agreed with her, saying that it was incredible, and he was curious how tall it was. But the main question that interested Helena now was where the core of this giant tree was located. Kang Gohan said that this tree was so huge that it was impossible to destroy it completely. Near the roots, they could see something that looked like a hollow, but they thought it might be the core, because something was hidden behind the branches. Looking closely, Helena realized that an Elietz with a weapon in his hands was hidden inside the tree. Kang Gohan said that the Elietz were a higher species of beings that surpassed humans. He asked her how she knew that he was one of them. She replied that she had already met some of them, and that they could be recognized by their unique wings and the fact that they carried weapons. Now she understood that the core of this place had been suppressed because it had been damaged by the Elietz weapon, and the training center didn't know about it. Kang Gohan suggested that now the core had been restored, and the forest had become active again. Helena said that this was true, and that the forest had apparently caught the monster and absorbed it to restore its strength, and now it was hunting them, using monsters. She believed that the core was located where the alien's weapon was stuck, and they needed to attack that area. The alien's weapon possessed enormous power, and if they could press down on its handle and drive it deeper, that would be enough to destroy the core. Helena said that among them, only Mr. Kang Gohan Yellow could put all his magical power into one strike. They had to open the way, and he had to destroy the core. And Kang Gohan had to land a precise strike on the first try. He was surprised that this task had been assigned to him, but Helena said that they had no time and needed to act immediately, and rushed towards the tree. Everyone followed her, and Kang Gohan wondered if he could defeat the huge moving tree. Helena said that they would cover for him, and that they needed to run at a distance that would provide Kang Gohan with a safe zone. Kang Ho Han saw that the branches of the trees around him were streaming like a waterfall. When his friends ran up to the tree, he told them to get ready, and then gave the command to begin. Helena warned that they would only have one chance, and that they had to clear the way by any means necessary so that Kang Gohan could finish the job. Seeing that she was about to use her weapon, he said that it might be better to use his weapon, but she was already attacking the tree branches, and said that she had been holding this weapon in her hands since childhood. The tree branches moved chaotically, and he thought that if he didn't cut them correctly, the blade would simply bounce off. But he watched Helena's actions with surprise. He realized that Helena's weapon could move in the same chaotic dance. Meanwhile, Lowen warned Horcrux to be careful, as the branches were approaching him from the left, and advised him to strike even harder. There were too many of them, but he was not going to give up, and chopped the branches with his weapon. But one of the tree branches wrapped around his giant's arm and tore the weapon from it. This was unexpected for Horcrux, but Helena came to his aid, cutting the attacking branch with her weapon. Sitting on the ground after this attack, he thought that something terrible had almost happened. He wanted to thank Helena for her help, but saw that she had already run on at incredible speed. Soon, they approached the very base of the monster tree trunk. Now the target was right in front of them. But then, from above, a multitude of branches fell on them, trying to grab them. They were too fast and managed to grab Harcrux, who now could not move. But, trapped by the branches, he shouted that he was fine and that the others should keep going. Turning around, Lowen also saw a branch, but she didn't have time to jump out of the way, and it hit her. Lowen fell to the ground, thinking that the branch was very strong and was immediately immobilized by the tree roots that had grabbed her. She shouted to the others not to look back because they couldn't stop. There was very little left. Now that two were trapped, only Helena and Kang Go-han were running towards the goal, asking them to be patient until they sent the monster to the other world. Helena tried to deal with the branches attacking her, but there were too many of them at once. She thought that if this continued, she would have to use both hands at once. But as she got closer to the tree, she said that they would fight to the end. However, there were still too many branches, and they managed to twist Helena. Seeing this, Kang Ho-han realized that she was trying to break free, using her last ounce of strength. Helena shouted to Mr. Kang Ho-han Yellow to step on her and push her away. He replied that he understood her, and, gathering speed, ran toward her at tremendous speed. After listing all his friends by name, he said that it was time to unleash the magical power he had preserved thanks to this trio. Pushing off from Helena, he jumped toward the tree, feeling the incredible magical power and heat bursting out of the giant's heart. He felt the cooling liquid reduce the heat of the giant's heart, turning into steam. Thanks to this, the giant's heart was able to generate even more magical power. Kang Go-han felt as if the pressure was suffocating him. At one point, one of the branches snatched the weapon from his hand, but he thought it was just a weapon. The main thing was that he still had magical power, and he prepared to attack. He began to beat the trunk of the monster tree, saying that no matter how fierce the battle was, he would not give up. Continuing his attempts, he muttered that he would only move forward. Finally, he cleared a path for himself, and pollen rained down on him from above. He approached the roots of the tree, but the branches tried to stop him. Fighting them off, he was about to dig up the roots. Finally, he saw the lifeless body of an Elion hidden in front of him. He thought that even the Alliance had tried to destroy the heart of the forest of monsters. And then he saw the true core into which Alliance weapon was stuck. Putting all his strength into his fist, he struck the hilt of the weapon, realizing that he needed to drive it in completely with this blow. But at that moment, he was grabbed by the branches of a tree, and Kang Go-han could not move. His friends were upset when they saw this, and Helena could not believe that it was really a failure. But Kang Go-han shouted that it was not over yet, and that the monster had caught the giant, not him. Realizing that he was going to finish what he had started with his bare hands, Helena shouted for him to stop, because a human could not cope with Elia's weapon. But Kang Go-han did not listen to her and desynchronized with the giant and climbed out. Jumping to the ground, he immediately saw the alien's weapon in front of him. Grabbing its hilt, he suddenly felt a strange sensation and realized that it was caused by the alien's weapon. He felt the same thing when he first picked up the magic stone. His whole body burned with heat, and his muscles cramped. Besides, now he had only 1 PM of magical power left. But in Baron Bourgeois' castle, he had performed a miracle when he didn't even have a single PM. Now, he needed all his willpower and muscle strength, and he knew that he couldn't retreat, and that he had to save the cadets. Meanwhile, the director tried to find out if reinforcements had arrived. The assistant replied that it would take about 10 more minutes. He said he had to go there, but the assistant reminded him that according to the rules, he had to defend the center until a state of emergency was declared. The director said that the cadets were a precious resource for the kingdom, and their loss would be a huge stain on its reputation. He thought he would be dismissed. Whatever the rules were, it would be better to take care of saving the children first, since he was facing disciplinary action anyway. Looking out the window, Harun Basio said that the boys just had to be patient. But then he saw the giant trees swaying and emitting steam, and couldn't understand what was happening. This was because Kang Go-han was pressing down on the handle of his weapon to drive it into the core in order to save the cadets. Finally, the entire monster tree shook, and an explosion thundered where it stood. The branches holding the cadets receded, and they were freed. Wondering if Kang Go-han had succeeded in his plan, coming out of the giant, Helena saw an incredible sight. The giant tree was turning into flower petals, and then, all over the forest where the monsters had previously lived, flowers began to bloom. Soon, the head of the center was informed that the monster forest had been conquered and that there were no injuries or deaths. Baron Harun Basio asked how this had happened and initially thought that Rafal White had done it. He was told that the report said that it had been done by 4 cadets, Helena Lowen and Harcrux, led by Kang Go-han. The assistants couldn't believe what they were hearing and didn't understand how the students could have destroyed the core. Kang Go-han, standing in the middle of the blossoming forest, thought that the world outside the inhabited zone was an unpredictable place, and that until recently, this forest had been teeming with monsters. But now it had become a blossoming forest and looked as if a festival was taking place there. The commander told his subordinates to make a good magical marking of the area. One of them noticed the alien's weapons, and another became curious if the giant could use them. Another asked his comrade to help collect magic stones, and said that if they split the tree, they could get a few. Kang Ho-han thought that this was the development of territory outside the inhabited zone. Here, they would be able to obtain many high-energy resources. Rin Ingenie approached him and said that she admired him. He greeted her and asked why she was suddenly greeting him like that. She replied that he was a hero and should be greeted properly. Before coming here, she wanted to explore another territory, but he had conquered this one. Kang Go-han asked if she was really leaving already. She replied that she was, and added that thanks to him, she had been able to see the Elion weapon. As she left, she said she needed to go on an expedition and thanked him, adding that a hero should eat lots of delicious food. Lowen approached him and asked when he had managed to befriend the head of the maintenance team. She asked him to tell her the secret. He replied that there was no secret, but she said that he needed to befriend the engineers before the end of the center in order to get personal tuning for the giant. He didn't know about this, and Lowen explained that engineers could add certain details to a personal giant or upgrade it. Then they saw Helena and Harcrux rushing towards them, who was clearly excited about something, and they asked him where he had been. But he asked why they were here, since they had 4 golden days off for self-development. They were supposed to eat well and have fun. Lowen replied that although she liked the weekend, she couldn't relax until their grades were announced. Harcrux said she had nothing to worry about because they were the best. They were graded on their reconnaissance mission, and they had not only reconnoitered, but also conquered. That was exactly why she was worried that they would lose points for not conducting reconnaissance, and instead going to conquer the territory on their own initiative. Kang Go-han said that she should stop worrying because her anxiety would not change the outcome. He added that he had prepared dinner for his friends with whom he had gone through hardships. They all went to see what was there because a weekend of self-development after such a fierce battle was useful for them. During this period, they needed to rest more and keep training to a minimum. They also needed to eat food containing mana to increase their magical power. Harcrux asked why they were celebrating in the forest and suggested that since they were having a corporate party, they could go to the dining room. Kang Go-han replied that they were having something like a picnic. When they entered, they were stunned with surprise and asked if he was really telling the truth. Taking a huge dish, he replied that it was ogre meat that they had caught, and there was only about 15 kilograms of it. He roasted the meat, which contained a large amount of dark mana, the source of magical power and the main element of magical synthesis. The nutrition window showed that thanks to it, muscle and magical growth were accelerated, and in addition, a bonus of magical growth was added. Helena asked if it was really okay to eat it, because they said that if you eat monster meat, you will get sick, and you can lose your magical power. Lowen said that if she didn't want to, she didn't have to eat it, but it was very tasty, and strangely enough, when she ate this meat, she felt her magical power growing. Taking a bite, Harcrux told her not to be picky and challenged her to eat the ogre meat. He enjoyed the amazing taste of the meat, and Kang Go-han told Helena to stop thinking and sit down to eat. Finally, she said that even though she didn't want to, she would try a piece because he had prepared it so diligently. She put a piece of meat in her mouth and after a second realized that it was very tasty. It was a taste she could not even imagine. Satisfied, Helena reached into her bag and said she would get something. Seeing that she had taken out wine made from steamed grapes, Lowen asked if she was really going to open such a treasure at the training center. Harcrux asked if it was alcohol, and Helena replied that it was. And if he was drinking for the first time, he should be careful because people who are weak to alcohol get drunk quickly. He became angry and said that he was not weak and would show her how well he could handle alcohol. He began to drink, saying that he was not weak, but Helena, seeing how quickly he was drinking, asked him not to drink so fast, as it should be done slowly. She offered to pour a glass for Mr. Kang Go-han Yellow, saying that it was very good alcohol. He replied that this weekend, he was going to focus on developing his magical power, and if he drank alcohol, he would lose muscle. But even Lowen said that steamed wine helps increase magical power, especially during the period of magical growth. Opening the nutrition window, he read that this wine helps restore and increase magical power after overexertion. In the end, he decided to drink it. After a while, the intoxicated Harcrux fell asleep, muttering in his sleep that he was not a weakling. Looking at him, Lowen and Helena laughed at the fact that the cute Harcrux was only pretending to be strong. Kang Go-han thought that he was the only one among them who had not drunk too much. But on the other hand, it was the weekend. Then he heard a noise and realized that someone was there. It seemed like someone was coming out of the forest. The girls saw the person walking towards them and said that he was probably going somewhere since he had a bag. It was Colt Black, and he said that they seemed to be having a great weekend. Lowen asked Instructor Colt what had happened, but he turned to Kang Go-han and asked if his offer was still valid. Shortly before that, Black had brought the director a letter of resignation. The director asked if he was serious. He replied that he was, and asked for approval. The director said that this was not just a resignation from the position of instructor, but also a renunciation of the right to be a knight of the kingdom. He asked why Kaltz was taking such risks when he could continue to live as a knight and become rich, but he was willing to trade all that for one boy. Black replied that sometimes money, a stable life, and fame were nothing compared to sincerity, and he confidently added that this was his decisive bet, and he would follow this path and believe. Standing up and walking to the window, Harun Bashio said that it was possible, and he would not deny that anything was possible. But he asked to look at the place where there had recently been a forest of monsters, and now there was a blossoming forest, and after it was annexed to the kingdom's territories, it would be explored. Border disputes were now more serious than ever before, and he said that real heroes appear in difficult times. The director believed that if this young man was really so talented, he could indeed become a nobleman. Patting Kalta on the shoulder, he said he hoped his bet would pay off and wished him luck. Kalta thanked him. And now, talking to Kang Go-han in the forest, he asked once again if his offer still stood. Kang Go-han remembered how he had asked Kalta to become his assistant, promising to become the best writer of all time, and to make sure that his assistants would also become writers. Kang Go-han happily replied to Kalt's Black that his offer was still valid. Kalt said that he would be his #1 squire, and even if he took on someone else later, he would still be in first place. Kang Go-han thought that having such a knight as his squire was not just a childish desire, and that this was what it meant to accept knights. Kalt's Black said that if he accepted him, he must become a powerful nobleman who owned territories and led giants. He considered this Kang Go-han's duty to him. He would fulfill his duty as a squire, and he would fulfill his duty as a lord. Black asked him if he understood, and when Kang Go-han replied that he did, he drew his weapon, knelt, and said that he was now his lord. As his squire and advisor, he swore to serve him faithfully and prove his loyalty with bravery. He promised to always come to his master's aid when needed, and in any situation, he would follow his faith in the righteousness of his master's path. Kang Ho-han did not know what to do, so Black told him to pull the weapon out of the ground, help him up, and return the weapon to his hand. When he did so, Kalt added that he would teach him the prudence and etiquette of the nobility in time. From that day on, he planned to live in Kang Ho-han's tent as his squire. He said that it was already quite late and advised him to go to his tent to rest. Kang Ho-han thought that just a minute ago, they were instructor and cadet, but now he had changed his behavior as if he had served him all his life. He thought that he also needed to match him and agreed to let Lord Kalt's Black take care of him. Black replied that it was an honor for him, and Kang Go-han thought that here, as if on another planet, on a dull and fierce land, another of his people had appeared. Waking up in the morning, he thought that yesterday had been like a dream. Seeing that he was already awake, Davis wanted to tell Kang Go-han something about Kalt's Black. Kang Go-han asked what was wrong. Davis said that he seemed very quick-witted. He slept a little, woke up at dawn, and stood guard near the tent. This was also new to him, but he told Davis that from now on, they would have to get used to it, because Lord Black was his #1 squire. Black entered the tent, and seeing that he was already awake, said that, as he had promised yesterday, he would tell him about the situation on the continent of Laniakea. Pointing to the map, he said that the borders of human lands were tightly surrounded by unexplored territories, and that all kinds of anomalous phenomena occurred there. Until the giants appeared, humanity struggled to survive on a land teeming with monsters. With the help of the giants, humanity can destroy monsters and conquer unexplored territories, and people can live safely in these lands. But humans are an insatiable race, and once the problems of survival were solved, the great powers began to compete with each other. And humanity's new power was directed towards conflicts and clashes with each other. And now there is a battle between the kingdoms of Rheinkal and Logot. Kang Go-han asked if a full-scale battle could begin soon. Black replied that it was possible and that it would be his chance. He did not understand what chance he was talking about, and Black said it was a chance to become a new nobleman. He said that many became nobles after the end of the previous battle, but this time, the fighting would be more fierce. Kang Ho-han realized that they probably didn't have much time. Black said that was true, and that he needed to increase his power quickly in order to prove himself in battle. If he invested enough in the new era, he could become a rich man. And to do that, Kang Ho-han needed to expand his capital of power. Black said that what happens after that is the most important thing. The future will come, the main reason why humanity lives on this barren land. The reason why people fought each other over the lack of resources was those who monopolized the bodies of gods possessing enormous power. These were the ones who had banished humanity to barren lands, beings beyond the reach of humanity. These were the aliens, who had become stronger thanks to the power of the gods' bodies. Cal's Black said that they needed to defeat the aliens. The aliens controlled historical sites, where one could become strong simply by standing in place. But the benefits of these lands were not available to humans. Black said that until now, no one had expressed dissatisfaction about this because the Elions were majestic and humans were insignificant, as they themselves believed. But he wondered, what would happen if the conflict between the kingdoms ended soon and humanity united its forces and confident? Kang Ho-han understood that he meant that if the battle between humanity ended, they would have to fight the Aliens for control of the continent. Black said that a game would soon begin in which the fate of humanity was at stake, but he did not yet have the right to participate in this game. He needed to get qualified as soon as possible. Kang Go-han asked what he should do in that case. First, he needed to join the Land Development Squad, where he would be able to upgrade his giant to the level of a giant god, Kyojin. Now that Black couldn't control the giant, he could see the situation more clearly. History was changing, and many writers would be able to take part in it. Later, the friends got together, and Harkrux said it would be great if the weekend could last forever. The next day, the results were to be announced, and the squads assigned. Lowen asked which squad they had applied for. Kang Go-han applied for the Land Development Squad, and Helena did too, because there, they would be able to use the best giants. Helena said that since the Land Development Squad explores regions rich in resources, they are supplied with the most technologically advanced spare parts. Lowen also applied there, and believed that as cadets with extensive practical experience, they would be guaranteed rapid promotion. Harkrux said he was interested in this, pointing to the elite's shiny white weapon. He said it was their loot, but the head of the training center forbade them to touch it. Even the technical specialists could only look at it. Lowen said that, according to their customs, a knight could keep the spoils for himself, and Harkrux became curious whether they would give it to them. Kang Go-han thought that the weapon contained enormous enormous power, and just by looking at the aliens, he could see how magical power slightly swayed their curls. He couldn't believe that such small armor and weapons could contain the power of a giant. But this race had developed in a different way than humanity. He wondered if this weapon belonged to him. Perhaps it would help in the fight against the aliens. But Helena said that was nonsense, and that it was impossible for an Elion weapon to be given to a human. The Aliens were united by the awareness that they were a chosen people, and they did not care about human customs. She believed that they would come to take their weapons back. Lowen asked how they would come if they did not know that the weapons were here, but Helena said that she was talking about aliens who were beyond their understanding. Until now, the weapons had been hidden by dark energy, but now that it had disappeared, everything was different. Therefore, the head of the training center closed off access. Black appeared and said that the head had not said anything about the aliens coming. He was simply following national law and did not touch their property. Kang Go-han couldn't get used to the fact that the Black Knight was now his squire. He had recently been an instructor, but now his authority had fallen. Lowen knew that according to the law, it was forbidden to take items belonging to the aliens. If he took it, it would immediately become clear that it was an alien item. Then they heard voices shouting that the aliens' armor and weapons were glowing, and that they needed to report this to the head of the training center immediately. One of the researchers said to write it down quickly. A pure white light emanated from him, and it was unclear what substance was causing him to glow. A crowd gathered around Eliot's, watching this phenomenon, not noticing that a huge shadow had appeared above them. Then one of them looked up at the sky and drew the attention of the others, telling them to look at what was in the sky. The cadets also looked up, not understanding what was there. Soon, they realized that it was a dragon, a wyvern, breathing fire and flying at high speed. It was the Lord of the Skies, and someone was sitting on it. They also saw griffins flying, creatures with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle. Helena frowned and thought that, as she had expected, the aliens had quickly found him. When they landed, the people around them recoiled because they gave off a very strong heat. Kang Go-han thought that this enormous pressure was coming out and pressing on his chest, as if he were inside a giant. The aliens walked past the people who fearfully stepped aside before them. They did not even pay attention to the people who were now standing behind them. When they were almost close to the aliens, they were met by Harun Basio, who said that they were happy to welcome those who had descended from the heavens. He introduced himself and asked if they'd come to collect the body and equipment of the young Elion, but they remained silent. Kang Go-han thought they were very dismissive and wondered if this meant that he was so insignificant to them that they did not even want to speak to him. He was a baron and a proud representative of the nobility, and even someone like him was being ignored. But it was necessary to avoid diplomatic disputes with the aliens. The head continued, saying that he understood that all this belonged to them and should be returned, but he asked if they would like to thank his subordinates. The alien, angered, broke his silence and asked what he had said and how he dared. The director did not understand what he had said wrong. The other asked if he was really talking to someone who had nothing to do with it. The director thought he should have kept quiet and wondered how he dared to say such a thing in front of the aliens. The alien descended from the griffin and, bowing to their leader, said that he would take the body and armor of their guide. He headed for the fenced-off area, and Kang Go-han thought that this was how it would all end. What belonged to the aliens would be returned to them, and he didn't understand why people should just sit and watch this happen without doing anything. He attracted the attention of the people and the aliens, saying that he was the one who had defeated the monsters and protected the armor and body of the alien. The dragon roared and began to approach him, and Kang Go-han thought he felt a sharp, hot impulse coming from it, but he decided to stand his ground and tensed his abs. When the Elion approached, Kang Go-han said that he and his comrades had risked their lives to protect the Elion's body and armor. He said that people say at least thank you for the sake of propriety. After all, they did the work that they were not capable of doing. The other looked at him silently, and Kang Go-han continued, saying that apparently everything was different for them, and that thank you was too loud an expression for them. Everyone around was shocked by what Kang Go-han said to Eliot's. Then the alien smiled and said that he should be grateful that he was allowing him to speak to him now. Kang Go-han was speechless. His interlocutor believed that dialogue with him was gratitude. Such arrogance was beyond his imagination. The Elion asked him who the people were who were with him at the time. Kang Go-han turned and looked at his friends, who were frightened by why now. He waved to them and told them to come closer, saying that they had tried so hard that they deserved at least a greeting. They approached fearfully and said that it was true, that they had destroyed the monster and fought as a group of 4. Kang Go-han mentally asked them not to be afraid, because the aliens would not even pay attention to uncertain people. Helena made a gesture with her hands and greeted the descendants of Slava and said that the 4 of them had joined forces to defeat the monster. The alien said that she surprised him because she knew their manners. He added that he understood that they had worked hard. Another threw 4 bags into the air, which moved smoothly toward the 4. They were very surprised, not understanding what it was, because the bags seemed to float right through the air. Seeing the bag of leaves in front of him, Kang Go-han became curious about what was inside. Elliot said that this was payment for their debt and that the conversation was over. He approached the body and used his magical abilities, after which it disappeared. People couldn't believe their eyes as they saw the body sucked into Elliot's hand. After that, the dragon roared loudly, the oppressive energy reappeared, and the elites flew away. Watching them leave, Kang Go-han thought about how they came and went as they pleased, and felt ashamed that people were so pathetic. They possessed enormous power and passed by as if humans were of no importance, as if they were weeds growing on the side of the road they were walking on. The researchers approached him and said that he was cool and told the elites whatever he wanted. They recognized him as an outstanding knight and even received compensation. Looking at the bag, he thought that all they had done was throw this grass bag at him as a handout without even explaining how to use it. With that, they just threw the bag at him and left, and ordinary people were afraid to even look them in the eye, let alone talk to them. And he thought disappointedly that today, the entire training center, which housed hundreds of giants, had been completely trampled into the mud by 3 aliens. Later, he took out the contents of the bag and called up an information window. It was a golden nutritional supplement containing the secret of golden glow. Within 3 days of consumption, it significantly increased the effectiveness of magical power and the amount of dark mana absorbed. Kang Gohan became curious if a person would receive an amazing effect after consumption, would it remain insignificant for the aliens? He decided that if it was a treasure for humans, it was something insignificant for the aliens. For him, it was charity, and his pride was hurt. Lord Jackson Silver, a frontline soldier of the Eastern Reconnaissance Corps, arrived at the training center. He said he had come to conduct an entrance test. This was a test for high-ranking cadets who wished to join the reconnaissance unit. The director said that it was unprecedented, that they had decided to conduct a personal review of cadets who had already been certified at their center. Jackson Silver gave him His Majesty's order for review. After looking at it, the director asked if the conflict with the Kingdom of Logot had really escalated. He replied that things were getting more serious, and that the recruits had to be talented enough to be immediately deployed on real missions. That was why he had come in person to select them. The director then handed him the papers, saying that these should be enough. After looking at the papers, which mentioned trainees who had been able to conquer territories outside the training area, he said that this was interesting. Harun Basio said that these were their best trainees, and that they expected a lot from them. He asked how he was going to conduct the tests. The man replied that it would be like practice. Their goal was to find cadets who could be used immediately in missions. He would take these talented cadets and assistants with. The director asked anxiously what exactly he was going to do. Taking out his weapon, he said he would teach them what the rear and the ferocity of the front were. Lying in his bed, Harcrux thought about the aliens, who were really strong, because even looking at them made it difficult to breathe. He did not understand why there was such a difference between them, because he had heard that humans were greatly inferior to them. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound, jumped out of bed quickly, grabbed his weapon, and asked who was there. In his tent was Jackson Silver, who said that he had good reflexes and was worth trying. Then, rushed into the attack. Harcrux thought this man was crazy fast, but he was not one to be easily defeated, and began to defend himself. But the man struck him with the hilt of his weapon and said that he did not freeze and counterattacked in unexpected situations and was quite skilled with weapons. After that blow, Harcrux lay on the floor in front of him, and Jackson Silver said that he was looking forward to the next cadets. Lowen had been sleeping peacefully in her bed for a long time when suddenly she heard a noise and opened her eyes. She immediately jumped out of bed, grabbed her weapon, and seeing an unfamiliar man in the tent, asked who he was. He did not answer, and then Lowen realized that she could feel a strong energy coming from him. Thinking that fighting him was not the most important thing right now, she ran out of the tent to report the intrusion. But as soon as she shouted that they were under attack, she was struck from behind. Jackson Silver decided that it was smarter to call for allies, rather than resist the unexpected invasion on his own. And he went on to Helena Yellow, leaving Lowen lying unconscious near her tent. When he looked into Helena's tent, the light was on, and she was awake. He said that she had apparently decided to wait for him herself. She replied that she had had such thoughts because the situation at the front was alarming. Someone from the reconnaissance unit could have come and tested that. And it was good that she had thought about it, because she was right. Jackson Silver said that she was smart and clearly familiar with the reconnaissance unit. And after asking if she would show him her skills, Jackson Silver began to disappear right before her eyes. Helena didn't understand where he had gone, but he reappeared, saying that he was below her, and struck her. Dodging the blow, Helena thought that there was nothing below and turned around. He said that she seemed to have understood everything at once and decided that he should go even lower, and attacked again, knocking the weapon out of her hands and hitting her in the face. Jackson Silver was about to strike again, but Helena managed to hit him with her head. Seeing the bump on her forehead, he asked if she had really taken his blow with her forehead, and he decided that there was no need to test her further. Helena asked if she could leave. He said she could, and that she was the first one who didn't end up unconscious, and congratulated her on joining the hellish squad. Leaving Helena's tent, he smiled and thought that everything was just as Rafal White had said. He was the only one who could stand up to him in battle. After that, he said that he would be satisfied with the current trainees. The guy with the highest score, Kang Gohan, remained. He thought he was an amazing cadet, with a score of 0 for attitude, but 40 for perseverance. But he earned 100 points for overcoming and fighting his way to becoming the best cadet. And Jackson Silver initially thought it was a mistake with the scores. But looking at the level of the other cadets, he eagerly awaited this meeting, wondering if Kang Gohan would surprise him too. When he saw black cows in front of him, he wondered if it was really him, or if he had come to the wrong place. Black asked what business he had there. Jackson Silver looked around, wondering if he had come to the right place. But anyone could see that he was already a mature knight and an experienced rider, and apparently the map was wrong. But he had to get to his destination, Apologizing, he said he had business with trainee Kang Go-han and asked if he could tell him where his tent was. Black asked why a man whose face he had never seen before was looking for a cadet late at night, since he didn't even have an instructor's badge. The man suggested he calm down and said that he was from the reconnaissance unit and was conducting secret selection tests to assess their abilities. Black said that if that was the case, then he had come to the right place, as this was Kang Go-han's tent. Jackson Silver was surprised that if this was a cadet's tent, what was a knight doing here? But he didn't dwell on it and said that since he had come to the right place, he would go in. Black blocked his way with his weapon and said that he must first report to the master. The master was surprised because he was only a cadet and not a nobleman. But then he realized that Black was Kang Go-han's squire and asked if that bothered him. He also asked if Black was sure he could be so rude to a member of the reconnaissance unit. He knocked Black's hat off his head and they crossed swords. Jackson Silver said that his weapon was quite unusual and offered to test his skills. Black asked if young people now fought with words. He said they could begin to see if he was worthy of fighting a master. At that time, Kang Go-han was already asleep, but hearing the noise, he got up to see what had happened. Taking his weapon, he left the tent and, seeing the men fighting, asked Mr. Kaltz what was going on. But after standing for a while and watching them, he decided that it was an amazing battle. The men continued to fight, and Jackson Silver was amazed at his opponent's explosive power. He did not understand what such a strong knight as Black could be doing here. At one point, Black disappeared somewhere, and a second later, he saw him above him, thinking that this was another surprise for the knight. Black attacked him from above, but Jackson Silver parried the blow. Wondering what was going on here, he realized that Black possessed the power of the wind, and that the direction of his movements was not easy to predict. And since it was a windy night, he had more opportunities for unexpected attacks. He didn't know what he was, but it was becoming more and more interesting for Jackson Silver. It was truly a wonderful gift. But he thought that no matter how well the wind hit him, there was no one who could keep up with his speed, and he rushed into the attack. Watching them, Kang Go-han thought that they were on a completely different level. The way they used magic and manifested their power was completely different. He and the other cadets used magical power like muscles, but Mr. Kaltz and this knight were completely different. They used magical power like a spring, and it could quickly expand and even explode. It happened as if inside an internal combustion engine, and it seemed as if they were simply rotating it inside themselves. He watched them, and the magical power that emanated from them was simply stunning. And if Kang Go-han could produce 10 times the normal power from 1 PM of magical power, they could produce 50 times more. He didn't understand why they were so different, but he understood that he needed to move forward. No matter how well he coordinated his muscles, the final performance could vary depending on whether they stretched or contracted. He thought that if he had as much magical power as they did and learned to distribute it throughout his body, he could use it even better. But for now, Kang Go-han did not understand how to achieve the same power. He wanted to become taller and go beyond their magical power. At that moment, Jackson Silver decided that he had finally caught Black, but he disappeared again. And this windy surprise annoyed him greatly. But he appeared very quickly, moving fast, and Jackson Silver, trying to catch him, wondered who he was. At some point, he got tired of it and suggested they stop, otherwise one of them would end up dead. Then, noticing Kang Go-han standing nearby, he asked if he was his master. Kang Go-han bowed and replied that he was indeed his master. Jackson Silver asked if this knight served this master as his lord. He replied that there was no other master here. Black told the master that he was a writer from the Eastern Reconnaissance Unit and had come to conduct a secret entrance test for their unit. The master brushed himself off and said that he was Jackson Silver from the Eastern Reconnaissance Unit. Kang Go-han saluted and said that it was an honor to meet him. He replied that enough with the honors and that he was accepted, and tomorrow they would set out for the east. Kang Go-han was surprised and asked if he didn't need to take the test. He replied that how could he test the master if he couldn't defeat his servant? He told him to go pack his bags. Jackson Silver asked his opponent his name. He replied that his name was Kaltz Black. Hearing the surname Black, he did not understand how this could have happened. Saying that they had missed it, he suggested they have a drink together when they arrived at the detachment, as it seemed that Black had something to tell. And he left, saying that he needed to test a few more cadets. Watching him leave, Kang Go-han asked Black what had happened here. Black replied that his master's weapon had won, and asked how he liked the duel. He said that he could not even imagine such a thing, and realized, once again, that there was much he had to learn from Master Cal's Black. Black was glad that he understood, because he wanted to show him a high-level fight. The next day, the director gathered the best cadets and said that usually, even excellent knights are given the surname Green, and their limit is usually red. But as cadets who have become official candidates, they will begin their journey with the surname White. He reminded them that this is not only a great privilege, but also a great responsibility. They must remember this and work hard on themselves every day. Although about 500 knights with the surname Yellow applied, only 78 people were admitted to the selection, but only 8 of them were selected as candidates for writers. And this was the largest selection, because that year, there were only 3 in their place. He also said that at that time, 1 or 2 people joined the reconnaissance unit, but now there are 5, and some of them have achieved great heights. He was referring to a special trainee who used to be poor and whom no one paid attention to. The director announced that their best trainee was Kang Go-han Yellow. He called him over, and he stood up and knelt before the head of the training center. Placing his weapon on his shoulder, Baron Harun Basio said that he was knighting him into the Order of Rheinkall on behalf of His Majesty Hanan Seraphet of Rheinkall. He asked the other cadets, who were also kneeling, if they swore to defend the kingdom of Rheinkall until their hearts turned to ashes. When they replied that they swore, the director said that he was giving them the surname White, and that from now on, they would carry out their mission as defenders of the kingdom. At the end of his speech, he congratulated Kang Go-han on becoming a writer and pinned a badge on his chest. At that moment, Kang Go-han thought that he had been a nameless citizen, but now he had a new name. Shortly after graduating from the training center, they all went to the eastern border. Lowen still couldn't believe that she was going there on the Royal Armored Transport Sleipnir, which she had heard about before. Helena advised her to calm down, because if she was so excited now, what would happen when she saw the royal train Mimir? She asked if Helena had already seen the Mimir, and when she replied that she had, she was amazed at how many interesting things she had seen. She was happy that she had become Loe White, and it was all thanks to Kang Go-han. Destroying the core and conquering the territory was the best decision at the time. Kang Go-han asked if it really was the best decision. She replied that of course it was the best, because the 4 of them were taken into one squad. Helena reminded him that, more precisely, 5 people were taken, because Gero was also traveling with them. He looked gloomy, and Kang Go-han thought it was because he had boasted about his 3rd place when he entered the center, but graduated in 4th place. He didn't make as much noise as before, and Kang Go-han thought that Gero didn't want to look like a fool in front of the guys he was friends with. At that moment, Gero saw that he was looking at him, and called him a poor guy, asking why he was looking at him. He said that he shouldn't think he was cool because of his graduation results, because when the practical training began, the gap between their skills would be obvious. Lowen intervened in their conversation, saying that Geroth shouldn't dare to insult such a knight, and immediately apologized. Geroth got angry, and asked what she would do to him if he didn't apologize. At that moment, Kang Go-han couldn't take it anymore, stood up, and started approaching him. Geroth asked him what he wanted. Davis saw this and asked Mr. Kelsey if they should stop them, but he remained silent. But Kang Go-han simply walked past Geroth and picked up a weight. And Geroth didn't understand why he did that, but he smiled and said that they could continue their argument while he trained. Rafal, seeing that he was going to train, was delighted and asked him to wait because he wanted to join the training. He said he could teach him how to use magic more effectively. He was an expert in quickly gaining strength, and they could teach each other. Davis laughed and said that it seemed Mr. Rafal had become more cunning after his promotion. Pointing to the weight, Rafal said that it was 100 PM. Very heavy, but he lifted it with one hand. He said that the heavier the weight, the faster the magic was gained. And touching Kang Go-han's muscles, he asked when he had managed to get so buff. Then everyone turned their attention to Gero, who had hoisted a heavy weight onto his back, and asked the squires to add even more. Thinking that they couldn't lose to Lowen and Harcrux, they also ran off to train. Trying to lift the weight, Lowen said that Harcrux was so boastful, but he wasn't even a nobleman, and next to a nobleman, he would look like a beggar. Now they all started training together, and Jackson Silver watched them in bewilderment. Before that, he thought this group of trainees was particularly outstanding, and now he understood that there were indeed reasons for that. Turning around, he looked at Kultz Black and decided that he couldn't fall behind his rival. Deciding to train too, he took a dumbbell and began to exercise while sitting in his place. Kang Ho-han looked at the others and thought that, as expected, in order to avoid a quarrel, everyone needed to let off some steam. It was already dark when Harcrass drew his friend's attention to what he had seen. It was the royal train Mimir. When they approached the train and Lowen saw it up close, she said that it was truly amazing. Kang Go-han thought that such a thing was impossible even on Earth in the 21st century, and wondered how such a huge thing could move at all. They began to go inside, and he saw that in the cargo compartment, there were 4 rows of giants, 8 to 12 meters tall. When they were inside the train, he was amazed by what he saw, and Lowen happily said that the inside of the train was also amazing. It felt like it wasn't a train, but a huge, mobile shopping center. Looking around, Kang Go-han compared it to a tsunami, or the highest mountain. Such was its enormous power. When the train started moving, Rafal said that the journey would take 4 days, and that they could spend them freely. He asked if everyone had received their room keys. Patting Harcrux on the back, Lowen said that this was another 4-day vacation, and that they needed to explore the train. Kang Go-han kept thinking that this was the civilization of Laniakea, which seemed backward, but it used a huge amount of energy that was not available on Earth. If they could create such a train, why not create a giant that was just as powerful? A huge force that could destroy mountains and cause tsunamis. While he was thinking about this, Lowen approached him and asked if he wanted to look around with them, but realized that he couldn't hear her. Black understood what he was thinking and said that there was a training center in Mimir. This interested Kang Go-han, and he said that there was excellent equipment there and that he might discover a whole new world. He asked if he should take him there, and Kang Go-han replied that of course he should, and decided to go there right away. Then Black asked permission to tell him what he had seen the night before. He remembered the duel between Jackson Silver and Cal's Black. Their methods of using magic were at a high level, like the secret power of knights. Colt said that learning it would not be easy, but Kang Go-han said that it was even more interesting, because if there were no obstacles, victory would not be as sweet. Saying that he was looking forward to it, he went to the training center with Kultz, while the others just watched them leave. Lowen said that it seemed he would not be going with them. Helena was surprised that he had been training all this time and was now going to train again. Upon entering the training center, Kang Go-han saw many people and said that it was a gym. Black said that the train ran between the border areas of the kingdom, and most of the passengers were fighters and riders, which is why it was so hot here. Sweat, passion, strength, and defiance reigned here. Compared to Earth in the 21st century, Liniakia was an extremely unpleasant place. But since there were training centers in this unpleasant place, Kang Go-han could make a happy life for himself. Black led him into a room where there were huge pillars covered with monster skin. Kang Go-han realized that they were punching bags. He thought these people were crazy, and their punching bags looked shabby. Black said that if he wanted to become a real knight, he would have to change the form and nature of his magical power and learn to control it. Usually, learning the skill took some time, but he thought the master would be able to do it. By changing the form of magical power, he would be able to immobilize much more power, regardless of how much he had. After listening to him, Kang Go-han understood why the battle between Jackson and Kaltz was so intense. Activating his abilities, Black said that magical power was something that went beyond consciousness and could become anything. And if he could realize this, he would be able to control the nature of his magic. Swinging his arm, Black hit the punching bag with such force that the men in the room turned to look. They were amazed at such enormous power and thought that this man was a giant rider. Black showed this blow to Kang Go-han and said that then he would be able to approach transcendence. Kang Ho-han asked him in surprise what exactly he should do. He replied that he should make his magical power more flexible and elastic, then twist it strongly as if pulling a bowstring and release it sharply. And he showed how sharp the blow should be and said that it was quite simple. Kang Ho-han hesitated a little and just laughed. He grabbed his head, trying to understand how to make his magical power flexible and elastic and then twist it. Kang Go-han thought that it might be easier if he used his visualization abilities and imagined himself standing at full height. He imagined his magical power in the form of a thin thread. And while it was in that state, he had to twist it. It wasn't easy. It was as stiff as the body of a person who had never done stretching exercises. He felt terrible pain, as if his body were being torn apart. Black told the master that such pain was natural at first, because changing the nature and form of magical power was not something everyone could learn. In training centers, they learn this continuously. It is a process where you need to use magical power to the limit and stretch it until it becomes flexible. He added that this process usually takes about 3 years, and Black believed that he would be able to transform his magical power. Kang Go-han doubted that he could learn this faster, since it had not even been 6 months since he discovered his magical power. But he understood a little of what Black was talking about, and he had the ability to understand what efforts were needed to rise from 0 to 100. All this was thanks to bodybuilding, the optimal way to gradually rise from the bottom to the top, and he had the experience and knowledge. It used to be believed that a large, beautiful body and outstanding strength, like that of Guan Yu or Zhang Fei, was something a person could only be born with. But research has shown that anyone can achieve a body with pumped muscles, and his experience and gift of vision are something that no one else in this world has. Be that as it may, he began to think about where to start, and he realized that what he needed was stretching, because he needed to make his rigid, magical power flexible. It was an unusual method in which he had to twist his magical power until he lost consciousness. With his ability, he could observe the stretching of magical power, and he believed that this was the best method. Kaltz Black understood that he had begun, but of course, he had no idea what exactly the master was doing now. But one thing he knew for sure was that the master always did everything his own way and achieved outstanding results. At the training center, he also refused to follow the accepted training program and practiced alone, despite the ridicule of the others. But he was able to prove himself right and achieved tremendous growth without asking anyone anything and conducting complex training sessions, sweating profusely. Black thought that the master was like a monster, and this time, he also found his own way. 5 hours later, Kang Ho-han happily thought that he had definitely been able to spin magical power for a short time. He approached the punching bag, deciding to try again, and concentrated. Kang Go-han hit the punching bag with all his strength. He was pleased with the result, and although it was far from Mr. Kaltz's punch, it was still a good punch. He decided to try again and hit it. But then Black, who was watching him, said that he had a long way to go. Black said that he had learned the simplest part, but he was far from his level, and he was even further from achieving the special method of transformation used by the nobles. But he admitted that he was surprised and said that was enough for today. Kang Go-han was delighted and said it was all thanks to Lord Kaltz. Kang Go-han said he was sorry that he had spent all his training time stretching. He asked if there were any serious training machines here. Black said that it seemed that nothing could stop him and that there was an amazing training machine called the train press. He asked to go right away, but Black was afraid he would overexert himself. But Kang Go-han said that if he didn't meet his daily quota, he wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully. Later, he thought that today he had learned a new skill and found an incredibly difficult exercise machine that was ideal for building muscle. And since there were 4 days left before arrival, it would be good to take the Alliance dietary supplements today to increase his magical power for 3 days. The train had the best exercise machines, and no one would disturb him. The next 3 days in Mimir would be the best time to take these supplements. After all, he wanted to become strong enough to defeat the strongest fighter as soon as possible. But then, Ren and Genie, the head of the maintenance team, who had left the training center earlier than the Giants, stood next to him, looking at them. He called her by name, and she turned around and was surprised to see Kang Go-han yellow. He laughed and said that he was now white, and Ren and Jeannie congratulated him. Kang Go-han remembered that she had said she was going somewhere and asked if she was going to the eastern border and why she had switched to a polite style of speech. She replied that she couldn't treat him with contempt because he was now white and was indeed going there. Rin and Jeannie asked if he was there to see the giants too. He replied that he was, and she said she had expected that and that she was good at reading people. Kang Go-han didn't understand what she meant. So Ren and Jeannie asked if he liked giants. He replied that he loved them. Hugging him, she asked if he would go on a date. He asked if it was with her and why so suddenly, but she said it was a date with the giants in the hangar, but he thought it was off limits for safety reasons. She laughed and asked him why he thought she became an engineer. She said that the barn was open to engineers all year round because if a giant suffered, the kingdom suffered too. He thought that was amazing. When they approached the barn, Ren said that every time she entered, she felt excited. Kang Go-han said that was what it meant to be a successful fan. He thought that when he approached the giants, his heart just burst in his chest, which is what their greatness meant. When he saw one of the giants, he wondered how many meters tall it was. It looked much taller than the 8-meter giants from the training center. Ren said that there is an expression, if you learn something properly, you can truly love it. She reminded him that he said he loved giants, but he didn't know everything about them yet, and she planned to tell him a lot about them. Kang Go-han was very surprised and became curious about what she wanted to tell him about the giants. She said she would be his special engineer tutor, and since he had become a candidate, they needed to strive together to become the best writers. He thought she sounded a little old-fashioned, but that was okay, because he also took giants seriously. He replied that he would be happy to listen to her. Ren began her story by saying that giants had 7 main areas, and reminded him that some of them had been discussed at the training camp. She talked about the giant's heart, a source of energy that radiates power, similar to that of the gods, and also controls energy flows. Depending on the classification and number of cores, the power, speed of task execution, and accuracy would vary. The second part was the SPU, located on the left side of the torso. It was a device that allowed the writer to possess divine and cognitive abilities. Kang Go-han remembered Pectoralis, whom he had met at the training center. He had a powerful SPU and could track 1,000 targets the size of a pea. This gave him an advantage during the battle in the monster forest. He was curious about how strong the sensory abilities of these giants were. Ren said that the strongest giants could even recognize supersonic attacks directed at them from close range. Kang Go-han wondered to what extent the giant's abilities could be upgraded. Ren suggested climbing higher for a better view. She pointed out that these giants' weapons had many slots, while the training center only had models with a limited number. In addition, Ren mentioned the giant's protective armor, asking if she needed to explain why it was necessary. And the final area was the giant's rider itself. All these components worked as a single unit, providing power for the giant's heart to function. She added that no matter how amazing a giant was, without a rider, it was useless. Kang Go-han compared it to something like a computer on planet Earth, but still, it was strange to him no matter how he looked at it. He asked Miss Ingenie how such a large amount of weapons and supplies could fit into the compartments. After all, even the weapons used in the center were huge. Winking at him, she replied that this was the main topic of their lesson today. It was the magic of engineering, and that was why they were all crazy about giants. Using one weapon as an example, she said that it was created with the help of engineering magic and could change its size. Kang Go-han wondered how something like this could be done using only human technology. She replied that it was impossible because complex devices and magical engineering came to them from the legacy of the gods. If you explore the area and destroy monsters, you can obtain opate material, which is used to make improved parts for the giants. She told him about the land on the continent where Laniakea was located, which was covered with the bodies of ancient gods and demons. And there, in the place where monsters were born, a giant capable of defeating them was also born. All this was the legacy of a great battle, and so she asked Kang Ho-han White to become an excellent writer of the eastern borders. She added that if he obtained good components, she would be able to significantly upgrade his giants. He asked if it was possible to upgrade and enlarge the weapons compartment and modify the SPU device. She replied that it was possible. Kang Go-han thought about the dozens of giants and the incredible power that moved the huge royal train Mimir about magical engineering. It had only been 6 months since he felt the magical power within himself, and he still had a long way to go. As long as a railroad. He heard a message saying that the train was passing through seas and lakes, and that you could hear the voice of a monster mermaid calling people and asking them to close the window. Kang Go-han looked at the lake. It covered a huge area. He couldn't see the end of it, and it looked more like the sea. He remembered the areas they had passed through in 2 days, a fairy tale field, and a forest of monsters. He thought that these were very large territories that had been explored for many years. He thought that if he had ended up in Laniakea 100 years ago, he would have had to lead a miserable existence, unable to escape such a situation. But now, humanity was expanding its territories with the help of giants, and he was curious about what awaited him at the end of the railroad. He understood that this would not be training, but real combat. But today, he couldn't wait for his training. Davis asked if he was training again. He replied that there was no time to rest, and that he should also wake up earlier to train together. Black approached them, and Kang Go-han asked him to take care of Davis. Davis said that his whole body ached, but Black still promised to take care of him. Kang Go-han said that over the past few days, he had seen improvement. Davis's shoulders had broadened, and thanks to training, he looked 10 years younger. Helena saw Kang Go-han and said that he had trained very hard yesterday and asked if he was going to train again. She asked if it hurt him because at such moments she thought she was going to die. He replied that he felt his muscles growing and couldn't stop. In addition, the effect of the dietary supplement given to him by the aliens was about to wear off, so he had to hurry. Helena said that since taking the supplement on his advice, she felt that her magical power had increased. Kang Ho Han said that was interesting and suggested they have a good workout today and see how much more she could lift. He said they would go to the gym to do sit-ups and push a whole train today. When they approached the training center, they saw a crowd of people, and Kang Ho Han didn't understand what the atmosphere was like today and thought there would be no classes. People in the crowd were asking someone, despite the fact that he was a newcomer, how he had already managed to become a candidate for the riders. Kang Ho Han became curious about who was there. Garo White was standing there, and they were telling him that they had apparently placed too much hope in him and asked if he knew what the eastern borders were. This place had seen battles with monsters and skirmishes with enemies from the kingdom of Logot. It was no place for people with his skills and level of mastery. He dared to call himself a knight, but this skill would be more of a hindrance, so he was told not to dare tarnish his majesty's honor. Seeing who was talking to Garo, Helena said they were nobles. Class division flourished in Laniakea, and there were those who were simply unattainable, like stars, children from noble families. Even the proud Garo had to bow his head before them. This outraged Kang Ho Han, because they were publicly insulting him. He became angry when he realized that it was considered normal for rich nobles to do something like this every time they didn't like something. Helena told him to control himself this time, because his opponents were nobles. In such cases of conflict, it was better to avoid confrontation, but he had already pushed through the crowd and stepped forward. The nobleman saw the badge on his chest and realized that he was a white. He asked Kang Go Han what he wanted and clarified that he was also, apparently, a new candidate. Saluting, he said his name was Kang Go Han White and that he had trained at the 13th Cadet Training Center. The other man also saluted and said he was Rannis, Viscount of Kane, and asked what business he had there. He replied that it was nothing special and that he was just curious about what disrespectful thing his classmate had done to them. Garo thought maliciously that he had made it up again because he himself could not even utter a word in front of the nobles. Rannis answered his question by saying that Garot had told him to get out of the way because he was blocking his path. Kang Gohan glanced at Garot and thought that this was typical of him because he believed in himself and his status as a white, so he became even more arrogant. And now he had also been rude to a man who turned out to be the heir to a noble title. Rannis said that he could forgive him for this rudeness because they did not wear badges symbolizing their status like they did. But he added that, in general, he didn't care about such an insolent and talentless guy. Angered, he asked if he should be worried now that someone who called himself a knight had appeared before his eyes. Then, approaching Garot and grabbing him by the hair, he asked if, perhaps, he should treat him the same way he treated these herbivores. After observing his actions, Kang Gohan thought he was rude, even though he looked only 17 years old. A sense of permissiveness had already taken root in him, but he was not surprised by this, as he himself had experienced humiliation and contempt from people of higher status. He said that they should be treated like knights, and even though they were still inexperienced, they had officially received the surname White and were sufficiently qualified. Pushing Garo away, Rannis asked if he really said that they were qualified. He told him to come closer and said that it was up to him to decide whether they were qualified or not, at least in this place. Rannis grabbed him by the throat, and Kang Gohan was surprised at such arrogance and that he was also judging the qualifications of the kingdom's knights. Helena, who was watching them, thought that he was a nobleman and had almost as much power as the king if there was no nobleman of higher status nearby. He did not let go of Kang Gohan, but Kang Gohan asked how he could prove his qualifications. He replied that his strength of spirit deserved attention and suggested testing him in the same way as Gera. He said that his friend had knocked out at 0.41% and that Rannis had not even managed to warm up properly. Everyone present went to the competition venue, and Kang Gohan realized that it was a train press. It took enormous strength to move the huge train of the kingdom of Mimir. Those who needed to train entered special compartments and generated part of the energy that powered the train. Kang Gohan was a little scared because Garo could only withstand 0.41%. He thought that considering the enormous size of the train, this was an incredible level, but even so, he could not meet Rannis Kane's standards. Rannis said that even if they were novices, he did not want to recognize the title of Knight White if he was not able to score more than 0.5%. He asked if he would accept the challenge, and said that if he exceeded that threshold, he would apologize for the disrespect he had shown to the honorable knight. But if he disappointed him, he would be punished. Rannis would give him and Garoth 5 slaps each. Kang Ho Han thought that slapping knights in front of everyone was the greatest shame imaginable, and that it was unfair for the sport. But if his goal was to make eye contact with the aliens, he couldn't back down just because he was afraid of humiliation, so he accepted the challenge. Calling up the information window, he saw that his opponent's strength was 1,321 PM, while his was 761 PM. By taking a dietary supplement, he achieved an incredible increase in magical power in 2 days, and yet it was only half the power possessed by the nobleman. But even knowing this, he did not want to lose, because if he planned to become a nobleman in the future, he had to not be afraid to do business with him. Kang Ho Han said he was ready to start right away and asked if Mr. Kane would participate. He replied that of course he would, because a person who cannot demonstrate his skills cannot be called a nobleman. And both opponents, preparing to start the competition, went to the press training compartments. Meanwhile, Davis told Black that Kang Go-han's body had become stronger, as he had said, and asked if it was possible to become younger and more handsome by increasing one's strength. The two of them were just passing by a crowd of people, and when Black saw Kang Go-han, he realized that it was a fight with the nobles. Upon entering the compartment, Kang Go-han thought that the principle of the press was similar to increasing strength in a giant, but the difference was in stability. Taking off his uniform, he decided that the press was a fantastic exercise machine on which one could challenge oneself and lift the maximum weight without risking one's life. He convinced himself that he could do it, and even if he didn't have much magical power, he could achieve 3 repetitions with the maximum weight. For example, 10 ringgits means lifting the barbell with the maximum weight and failing on the 11th lift. Similarly, with magical power, some people have a rating of approximately 10 to 20 ringgit. Using magical power is a more complex process and requires more willpower than using physical strength. Kang Ho-han exhausted himself with magical power training from the very beginning, but even after his magical power increased, 1 RM was difficult for him. However, his ability to see his body's parameters allowed him to directly see the flow of magical power. Therefore, he wanted to try fighting. He started the competition and needed maximum performance without breaks. Kang Go-han began synchronization and understood the pleasure of training. It was the union of a small man with the Mimir train, which was much larger than a giant. Now, he could feel the movement of the train with his whole body. He could even feel the rushing wind blowing from the plains and feel the train rushing forward, cutting through the wind sharply. Kang Go-han felt the earth shaking and trembling, as if it were touching his skin, giving him goosebumps. The higher the percentage, the more interesting the sensations became, and he had to go all the way. People watching the competition were amazed that he had already exceeded the 0 mark by 0.6%, and they were curious to see how far he would go. Kang Go-han was curious to know what percentage Ranus Kane had achieved by this point as he continued to push the train without stopping. But then he began to realize that he was already at his limit. His knees and back were shaking, his vision was darkening, and it was becoming difficult to breathe. Seeing this, the audience felt sorry for him and thought he would stop there, but they still considered it a successful attempt. However, gritting his teeth, he decided that this was not all, because he had not yet reached the personal record he had set yesterday. He still had an ace up his sleeve, and that was the transformation of magical power. He knew he couldn't squeeze out much, but thanks to this, he would overcome the limits of his magical power and set a new record. And he decided to challenge himself with the strength he had left and take the heaviest weight, which he wouldn't be able to take a second time, 1 ringgit. Kang Go-han knew that if he stopped, his vision would darken. And finally, he realized that he had managed to generate more than 1% of the energy for this huge train. He was able to break through his barrier. Judging by the information window, after using his magical power, his willpower had increased by 1 unit. He thought that this dispute was worth it. And even Helena, who possessed a power of more than 1,000 PM, could only achieve 0.72%. Going outside, Kang Go-han did not understand the atmosphere around him, and then realized that Ranus had not yet come out. He saw that he had scored 1.3%. Kang Go-han was surprised by this, because scoring 1% already makes your head spin. But he added another 0.3%. Ranus was 3 years younger than him, and he couldn't believe that this teenager was able to squeeze so much out of the power of this huge train on his own. The numbers on the scoreboard kept growing, and Kang Go-han thought that this was what nobility meant. And he felt awkward because he thought he had a good chance. He didn't understand how he did it, because he himself had used a critical burst of magical power 3 times and even applied its transformation. Most likely, he had put in the effort for 10 critical bursts. Kang Go-han realized that Ranus was using his power while leaving a little in reserve. He kept asking himself how this happened, not noticing Black approaching him and telling the master that he was a nobleman. Black said that every member of a noble family has a special secret passed down from generation to generation, regardless of what skills they possess. He added that they were the ones who were able to establish rules in the territory and master their skills, so ordinary people could not even keep up with them. But even so, Kang Go-han could never have imagined that the secret knowledge of noble families would be at such a level. At that moment, Ranus stopped and left. His score was 2.36%. Kang Go-han understood that there was an insurmountable wall, a huge gap between them, and that he, who had promised to become a nobleman, had to overcome this gap. Approaching him, Ranus said that it had been interesting to argue with him and that he was different from that herbivore, meaning Jarot. He apologized for humiliating such a noble knight, and he said that nobles apologize not only with words. Ranus called a servant who was standing nearby holding a suitcase and told him to bring it over. The suitcase contained a modernized part for the SPU, and if it was inserted into the giant, the performance of the touch-sensitive information processing device would improve. He said that it would definitely be useful to Kang Go-han and help him forget about his rudeness. Kang Go-han thanked him, but his mood was ruined. Rannis and the others left, and Kang Gohan, looking at the suitcase, felt as if he had been given alms. Still, he was grateful to Rannis for giving him a good part that would make the giant stronger, and he thought that step by step, he would become stronger, and at some point, he would find himself in the position he was in now. After a while, the train arrived at its final destination, the Eastern Border Fortress. Getting off the train and looking around, Kang Gohan thought that this was the Eastern Border Fortress. It was high walls, stretching endlessly across vast plains. He saw a huge crane for lifting giants, and many engineers with various equipment for inspecting giants. He was struck by the incredible size of it all. It looked like a huge port in Busan. Davis looked around and said that it all looked very familiar to him, and that it even made him sad. But he was annoyed by the sound of the hammer, and Kang Gohan thought that it was probably a trauma from the blacksmith factory during the time of Baron Bourgeois. Jackson Silver said that since the commander was away, the settlement would not be so formal, and told the candidates to follow him. They climbed up to the castle, and Harcrux was amazed at the height of its walls. It felt as if they were on a hike. Lowen, who was walking ahead of him, was delighted with what she saw, and said it was amazing. The front line was behind the fortress, and Lowen, approaching the edge of the wall, was delighted with the impressive view. Beyond the walls of this castle stretched an endless, unexplored territory. Jackson Silver said that now was not the time to admire the scenery, and added that, as they could see, the fortress was surrounded by uncharted lands. He warned that if they were assigned to this area, they would not be able to spend their days lying in bed, because battle could break out at any moment. Pointing into the distance, he said that the fiercest battle was there, in the sea labyrinth that they had begun to explore 3 years ago. Rafal said in surprise that it was the sea, and asked if there really was a labyrinth in it. He replied that it was a large lake with salt water, but what was unusual was that the land under the water was shaped like a complex labyrinth. Lowen asked if that meant they could only sail through narrow passages. He said she was smart, and that was true. And that's why it was strategically important to them. This region was rich in resources and had become the largest battlefield between the kingdoms of Rheinkal and Logot, with fighting taking place every day recently. But he said that they had not been assigned to this region because the official giant riders, Silver and Gold, were there. They would have to defend the fortress from the rear and destroy the monster villages, or explore small unexplored territories nearby. He said that in these places, out of 3 people sent, 1 couldn't take it and gave up. Another was transferred due to injuries, and the last one was shaking with fear. Jackson Silver added that he had lost many colleagues this way, and that the same would happen to them. He asked them to remember that this was a battlefield, and that today was the first and last time they would enjoy the views here, and that they would be risking their lives here. Then he showed them the giant hangar, saying that the main giant was used by riders of silver level and above. Then Jackson Silver showed them the Cyclops riders they would become. Lowen was delighted that they were much larger than the training giants. Looking at one of the giants with excitement, they thought it was over 20 years old. Kang Gohan, breathing in the smell of steel and oil with pleasure, thought it reminded him of a hangar. Every time he smelled it, he felt like he was coming home. The smell seemed to bring back memories of his past life. Rafal said that they would finally be able to try driving the Cyclops. He asked if he had driven the advanced giant at the training center. He replied that he had driven a very old model of the Kairos, and it was great, but the riders considered it half as good as the Cyclops. These giants were 9.5 meters tall and 4.5 meters wide at the shoulders, and their weight alone, 20 tons, was enormous. Its dynamic joints were designed so that it could start moving at any moment, and he would soon find out for himself that this was a completely different level. Jackson Silver said that all these giants were similar in characteristics, so they could choose the one they liked best. Lowen and Harcrux immediately ran to choose, and Harcrux said that the coolest giant would belong to him. Kang Gohan thought that no matter how much Jackson tried to scare them, they still couldn't contain their enthusiasm. It was the excitement of becoming real riders. But even though Jackson Silver said they were all similar, Kang Gohan still wanted a giant that would exceed all expectations. Looking at one of the giants, Rafal thought it might be worth trying to start its engine, and Kang Gohan thought it was time for him to start too. Noticing him, Helena wondered if Kang Gohan White had already chosen a giant. She remembered that this was also the case during training camp, when he didn't try to start the giant, but simply chose something on his own. And indeed, approaching one of the giants, he thought that this was the one, and said that he was choosing this giant. Seeing that he had made his choice, Rafal said that he had done the same thing at the training center. He could feel and choose it on his own, and he was jealous. Looking at the chosen giant, Kang Gohan gave it the name Femoral, which meant thigh muscles in Latin. When they had all chosen their giants, Jackson Silver said that next week, they would only have to choose and equip them with weapons. He said they needed to think about what fighting style they could use to remain riders for a long time. So they were given a week. They needed to check the equipment that was already in the arsenal. There was so much of it that even a routine inspection would take a long time. Kang Gohan understood that he needed to choose his weapon and build his fighting specialty around it, but there was so much of it that he didn't know how to check it all in time. Rafal Black was already busy testing his weapons, and they had a long way to go because there were countless weapons gathered here. Jackson Silver said that if they had brought any parts with them, it would be worth loading them into the giant now, and the local craftsman would do everything quickly. Rafal said that he had purchased some parts earlier and asked if he could load them now. Jackson replied that he could, and asked if anyone else wanted to. Garrow also said that he had an extra slot for weapons and one weapon. Jackson said that was great and that he could install them. Kang Go-han waved him off, but Jackson Silver was surprised because Rafal was a veteran rider with 4 years of experience, and Garrote was from a wealthy family. He asked Kang Go-han if he really had something or if he had misheard. Kang Go-han showed him the suitcase and said it was there. Looking at the contents of the suitcase, Jackson Silver was surprised because it was a part for an SPU. He asked where he got such an expensive thing. He replied that he was just lucky. And the engineers who heard this conversation were surprised that a newcomer had a part for an SPU. All the engineers wanted to install it because it was a part for the SPU, and they couldn't resist. They examined the part, appreciating the delicate workmanship. It was a rather expensive model among all the spare parts for the SPU. Kang Go-han thought about what they said, that the engineers were crazy about new parts, and now he heard only enthusiastic reviews. But he wondered if he could trust them with it, because it was his first improvement. Then, looking up at Ren and Genie, he thought he had found the one who would train his giant. He waved happily and greeted Ms. Ren and Genie, and the other engineers looked on with curiosity to see who it was. She approached and said that they had met even earlier than she could have imagined. Realizing that they knew each other, the other engineers decided that they had failed with the SPU installation. Kang Go-han said that it seemed like the engineer's schedule was very busy since they had only arrived today, and asked if she had had time to rest. Ren replied that she had the weekend off until the day after tomorrow. But how could she rest when Cyclops was here? Then he asked if he could ask her to help with the update, and she replied that she had come here for moments like this. At that moment, the other engineers noticed the badge on her chest, which meant that she was an engineer from the Royal Workshop. Meanwhile, Ren and Genie and Kang Go-han went to the service area, and he said that she was very enthusiastic. Looking at his giant, Ren asked if he had already given it a name, and he replied that he had named it Femoral. She said that he always gave them unique names, and decided to start upgrading Femoral right away. Ren and Genie began working, saying that the new SPU would be very suitable for Femoral. She took some kind of compound and began pouring it onto the hammer, and Kang Go-han, a little frightened, asked what she was pouring. She replied that it was a magical compound and that the Mirni used to make the SPU could freely change shape when it reacted with the compound. Watching her work, he thought it looked like ordinary hammer blows, but they changed the position and shape of the complex gears inside the SPU. He saw how the SPU, as if responding to these blows, emitted a light that was sometimes bright and sometimes soft. It was truly the unfathomable world of magical engineering. When the sound of the hammer became louder, the light emitted became brighter. Then, there was a sudden flash that made him close his eyes. The giant was like a living, breathing creature, and even someone who knew nothing about it could tell that the upgrade had been successful. Davis approached him and said that it was beautiful, drawing his attention to the sounds of the hammer. Kang Ho-han remembered that, not long ago, these sounds had annoyed him, but Davis said that this sound was different, and that he would like to work in a place like this. Kang Go-han saw a sparkle in the eyes of Uncle Davis, who had previously worked as a master craftsman at Baron Bourgeois' wrought iron factory for the first time. He thought that with the advanced Cyclops trainer and the improved Femoral, he was now a cut above everyone else. Later, the commander asked Jackson Silver how things were going with the newbies. He replied that they needed to be watched closely, but he expected a lot from them. Then she asked if they should give them a special welcome. He replied that it was a combat situation and asked if they would be all right. She said that it would certainly be difficult for him to look after them, but since the situation had turned out this way, they needed the strongest. She said to throw them to monsters that were impossible to defeat, and then pull them out before they went to the other world. A week after their arrival, the giant riders were preparing to attack. Kang Go-han saw Jotun, controlled by Silver and Black, up close for the first time. Jackson Silver said that usually when new riders come to them, there is an official meeting, but now things were different, and he announced that they had been assigned their first mission. They were all surprised, but Lowen was delighted, saying, "Finally." At the entrance to the Great Forest, a group of goblins had formed a village and were growing in power, and he gave them the task of reducing their numbers as much as possible. After listening to Jackson Silver's speech, Kang Go-han thought that they were finally going into real combat. When he ordered the recruits to get into their Cyclops, they happily ran to them. Sitting in the giant, Kang Go-han assessed that the level of visibility was better than in the Pectoralis. Strong pressure enveloped his body, but he could get used to it. He asked himself if he was nervous, and answered that he was not, because the enemy was a goblin. Raphael loaded in 8 seconds, Kang Go-han in 31, and the rest in 45 seconds, which was not a bad result. Lowen said that this mission was too boring because it was goblins. She asked when they would be sent to the front lines. Harcrux also asked if they should be given at least a task with ogres to test their strength, but Helena objected that these people didn't know them and that they had to complete every task, and step by step, they would get closer to receiving bigger missions. When Jackson Silver gave the order to attack, they all ran out of the castle and rushed to the gate exit. While in the giant, Kang Ho-han thought that Jackson had said to make mincemeat, and he knew exactly what he meant. Goblins were coming out from everywhere, emerging from behind tree trunks and jumping off branches. They ran, clinging to the giants and throwing weapons, and everywhere you looked, there were goblins. With a few blows, they were torn to pieces and crushed with fists. There were even cases where they exploded from the force of the blows. It felt like, instead of fighting, They were chopping onions, crushing garlic, and slicing tomatoes, as if they had been thrown into a huge cooking area. For some reason, they separated the recruits from Rafal and gave them a separate task. Jackson Silver just stood above and watched them. Kang Go-han even thought that it felt like they wanted to turn them into minced meat, but he decided that he would take on all of them, no matter how many there were, because wherever he went, there was this damn hazing. He already understood his intentions. The food supplement had been completely absorbed, thanks to which his magic level had increased to 832 over the past week. His strength had also increased, but it was still not enough to cope with the flow of goblins, and he wondered if they would be all right. Kang Ho-han asked the guys how they were doing with their strength recovery rate and if they were okay. Lowen replied with regret that the process had slowed down. Helena had about 60% of her original strength left. Her strength was being depleted faster and faster, and it couldn't go on like this. Kang Go-han knew that strength had the ability to recover quickly if it was used up to the limit. But the more it was used, the slower the recovery rate became, and this was especially noticeable in the weakest. The weakest among them was Harcrux, who now realized that he had no time to rest, as he tired too quickly. Thinking that if they lost even one person, he would not have the strength to hold on, Kang Go-han decided that he needed to buy some time. He shouted to Harcrux that he needed a little time to recover. The goblins began attacking again, and as he fought them off, he thought that even though they were smaller than a giant's fist, there were so many of them that there was no end in sight. At that moment, Helena realized what needed to be done. She told everyone to focus and form a circle around Harcrux. She shouted for everyone to switch their weapons to huge shields and catch their breath while Harcrux regained his strength a little. Weapons created with magical engineering could change size. When they were placed in the inventory, the rotation of the gears reduced their size, and when they were taken out, the same gears returned them to their original size. Now all the giants took out huge shields, and the crowds of goblins could not break through them. Lowen did not like this at all, and she believed that if Mr. Raffle were with them, they would quickly deal with everything. Helena said that it would be an excellent strategy if she and Rafal attacked the goblin village from two sides. Kang Go-han thought that they didn't even know how to retreat because goblins were rushing at them from all sides. It was a planned tactic to make them suffer. And although it was reckless to attack giants when they were 160 centimeters tall, they put pressure on the riders because of their numbers. Watching what was happening, Jackson Silver thought that the recruits were reaching their limit and that it might be time to intervene. At one point, a goblin with a huge weapon appeared, and his blows to the shield were different from the previous one. Kang Go-han realized that this weapon was made of a material from the bodies of ancient gods and demons. Helena said that this could not go on, and suggested that as soon as everyone caught their breath, they should attack again before more goblins arrive. She asked Garou to clear the way, because if he, with his greatest firepower, took the initiative, they would be able to unite even more. He agreed, and Helena told the others to fight the goblins that remained after he cleared the way. Garou decided to use a special explosive magic weapon that Viper had brought with him. After a while, he cleared the way, and while everything was quiet, the goblins did not attack. But Garou thought it was unwise to use Viper several times during the battle due to its high power consumption, and silently prayed for it all to end. Kang Go-han, seeing that the path was clear, said that now they would roast them, and rushed into the attack, the others following him. They continued to fight the goblins, but they were endless, and it felt like they had already defeated more than 1,000 of them. Kang Go-han's strength had greatly diminished, and he realized that even if he rested, he would not regain even half of his strength. It felt as if he had walked 40 kilometers with a huge weight on his back. Femoral was also tired, and his joints were creaking. Lowen asked if anyone had special weapons like Gerou's, but still, the number of monsters was more than they could handle. However, Helena said that if they retreated, their lives as riders would be over, and they had to hold out until the order to retreat was given. Kang Go-han thought that training should be conducted systematically, based on scientific data, and should not be backward and ignorant. But there was no other way out, and clenching his fist, he thought that he had no choice but to accept their methods, and he hated himself for still being weak. He thought that if they had had the opportunity to rest, and the goblins' attacks had not been so fast, they might have had a chance. While he was thinking about this, Garou approached him and handed him his Viper weapon. Kang Go-han asked why he had done this, but Garou simply told him to use it. He objected that it was his weapon, but Gareth said that even though he didn't want to admit it, Kang Go-han was stronger than him. He said he didn't want to lose, and thanks to this weapon, Kang Go-han would be able to break the goblins, and he would have time to catch his breath. Garou could only throw it once, and believed that he could do it 2 or 3 times, and that way, he would be able to defeat them. Then, Kang Ho-han took the weapon, thanked Garou, and mentally asked the guys to wait a little longer. Garou began to recall his past when he saw a nobleman mocking his father. The man beat him, and, after he fell, asked how he dared to lie in front of him. He got up, apologizing to the elder, who asked if business was going well, and said that there were rumors that he had become rich. He said that so many gold coins had passed through his hands that he could see nothing but them. He told him to open his eyes and see who was in front of him. The elder said that apparently, when he started spending money and hiring servants, everyone began to look the same to him. He replied that this was not the case. Little Harot heard from around the corner as he said that the person sitting in front of him was no ordinary man. He cried when the elder said that the person sitting in front of him was an aristocrat and that no amount of money could buy him a personality. As they were leaving, his father told Harot that this was not surprising and that he should not be sad or angry about it because his opponent was a nobleman. It was the right of the strong to treat the weak this way. and it was natural that his father suffered because he was weak. But his father wanted him to become much stronger than him. He believes that Gero would surely become a great writer, then a knight, and then a nobleman. He told his crying son not to let those who were weaker push him around, but to attack them and become stronger himself. Holding Gero's weapon in his hand, Kang Ho-han thought it was just a monster. He felt a monstrous tremor, and sparks flew from the giant, and steam emanated from it. He understood that he needed to unleash all the magical power that remained in him. He had to move using the strength of his lower and upper body, and the most ideal movement for this was a push from weightlifting. Due to the pressure of the giant's heart, he felt heaviness in his arms, shoulders, and legs. But this heaviness was familiar to him. He had to twist and squeeze the streams of magical power and then unleash it. Kang Go-han succeeded. He spun the viper with tremendous force and struck. And that was the first attempt. The goblins scattered in different directions, and he continued to move forward, although he could hardly see anything. But it didn't matter to him, because Femoral had a modernized sensor processor and could see all his opponents. Realizing where he needed to strike, he gathered himself and made another attempt. And thinking that he needed one more, he made a third attack. When the dust began to clear, he wondered if he had succeeded. His strength was 3, and he knew that it would begin to recover after the value reached 0. He needed to hide from the goblins and recover. As he slowly led Femoral, the viper made threatening sounds, and the goblins shied away from him. Even Helena was speechless when she saw that the goblins, who had been flocking to them like moths to a flame, could no longer fight. They all stopped in front of the goblins, who now looked up at the giants but did not attack, and it was stunning. Now they could set the pace of the battle themselves, and if so, they would be able to regain their stamina. When Kang Go-han's strength increased again, he decided it was time to move on to the next step. Helena said that he had regained his strength, and that when they got tired, they would ask him to sweep away the goblins again. Kang Go-han told the guys to hang in there, and now they were leading again, spinning the viper in preparation for an attack. At that moment, he heard a familiar voice saying with admiration that they were still holding on. It was Rafal, and he said that this group of recruits knew how to surprise him. And since they were all gathered here, he suggested finishing quickly. They all began to attack the goblins together, and Jackson Silver, watching them, couldn't believe it. In the history of the Reconnaissance Corps, there had been recruits who could hold out long enough, but there had never been guys capable of defeating the enemy. He was already amazed that one of them, Kang Go-han, knew how to use magical power and had a knight named Kultz as his squire. It was an initiation ceremony that would help them realize the horror of the battlefield and teach them to be cautious and ruthless. After a while, the recruits, who had won a complete victory, tried to catch their breath, exhausted. Rafal admitted that at first, he thought they would simply fall apart and did not think they would be able to hold out until the end. He added that he survived thanks to them. But Kang Ho-han objected that they survived thanks to him, because he alone killed many more goblins than they did. Therefore, there was no point in comparing. He thought that he was indeed black, and although not yet an official writer, he possessed such a level of skill. Rafal said that he knew many skills and techniques that they still had to learn, and that his weapons were stronger. Therefore, he admitted that they were amazing. Kang Go-han said that they couldn't have done all this without Gero's special weapons, and added that it was all thanks to him. Handing him the viper, he thanked Gero and said that his weapon had been very helpful. But Gero said that he could keep it, and promised to give him an extra slot for this weapon when they returned to camp. Kang Ho-han was very surprised, and asked again if he really wanted to give him the weapon. Jarrett said that he definitely felt it on the royal train and today. And besides, everyone knows that he is one step ahead. He even teared up, admitting that he wanted to become stronger like Kang Ho-han. Remembering his childhood, he wanted to be on par with a strong man who bravely opposed the nobles. He wanted to acknowledge his superiority and reality. Soon, Jackson Silver reported to the commander that the hazing plan had failed because Rafal Black had joined them. The commander of the eastern border fortress, Collie Stetchwold, said that they had an advantage in the form of special weapons, which is why they were given such a difficult task. Jackson said that even considering everything that had happened, this was the first case of its kind, and it could be said that they were the best newbies ever. Then, slamming her palm on the table, Callie Stehold said that everything had been decided, and the commander of the eastern border fortress decided that these brats would go to the front line. Jackson Silver was very surprised that they would be sent to the front line instead of the third or at least the second line. The eastern border fortress covered 4 main areas. The most dangerous was the combat zone. This was an area with a sea maze, where fierce fighting with the kingdom of Logot was taking place, and where the gold and silver level riders were stationed. The next dangerous place was the guard post, where the best knights, white and black, together with the knights silver and gold, were on duty. New recruits were usually placed in the safe third line. Placement in the second line was considered a success for new recruits. But now, it was a completely different case. Jackson Silver told the Countess that it was a big risk to assign new recruits directly to the front line, and that it was unprecedented. She replied that the recruits themselves had already done something unprecedented, and in this case, they deserved to be treated in an unprecedented manner. She added that Jackson Silver would be the commander of the checkpoint. He asked what he had done wrong to be assigned as commander of the checkpoint. Jackson said that by assigning him there, she was excluding him from the combat mission, and she knew how long he had waited for this, and that he was obliged to go. She said that if all the aces were sent to the front line, there would be no one left to guard the rear, and she was leaving him in the rear because she cared about him. The number of people there had been cut in half, so the checkpoint was not so easy to guard. That's why she needed him and could rely on him. She asked him to do his best and added that he should think about advancing to the gold level. But she allowed him to use a special medium difficulty tactic for this group of 5 and told him to train them well. He was surprised that she allowed him to use this tactic for beginners, but she said that if he succeeded, he could get a status higher than gold. Now, Kang Go-han felt at peace. Victory is always great, but when he looked at the spoils, his heart beat faster. The spoils were thousands of lifeless bodies of goblins and opats that they had used. When all the spoils were brought in, the engineers were very surprised at how many individuals and opats there were, and that all this was done by beginners. The engineers believed that they would receive good equipment for all this. And looking at these young guys, they said that the kingdom had a bright future ahead of it. No sooner had the boys entered the fortress than a crowd of employees rushed towards them, shouting for the knights to come to them. They began to offer their services, some promising to do it cheaper than others, and some promising to do it all the way through. But then Jackson Silver appeared and said that they had gone the wrong way and should follow him. Watching them go, the engineers did not understand why they had gone to the royal workshop and why the newcomers were being led there. In addition to the innovative workshop where specialists from different countries worked, there was also a royal workshop in the fortress. And in this workshop, a team of outstanding specialists called upon by the kingdom had been formed. In the royal workshop, no one fought for orders because they had to deal with official riders of the silver, gold, or black level. Helena said that this place was not for them, who had just received the white level. Jackson Silver replied that this was usually the case. He said that this time, the 5 of them would study medium difficulty tactics. Helena didn't even believe it and asked again about medium level tactics. Jackson said that was true and that they needed to decide on their positions. Moving between the front and rear, the striker was the most explosive in terms of damage. There were other positions, and each of them had to think about which position suited them best. Lowen said that Kang Go-han should be the striker. He thought that a striker was explosive power. And just hearing the description of the position made his heart beat faster. They decided on that, and Jackson, welcoming them to the royal workshop, warned them to be careful and behave themselves. As soon as they entered, they immediately began to marvel at how huge everything was. But Jackson Silver asked them to be quiet. There were many books and equipment in the royal workshop, and the atmosphere was like that of a huge library. Various types of equipment were stored on tall display cases and shelves. Reference materials were labeled and neatly arranged on the shelves. Riders and technicians were standing around everywhere, discussing something, and no one was advertising their services here. Opening one of the doors, Jackson showed them the firing range. The riders and technicians were preparing for the campaign, and they could watch. In this huge space, production, research, storage, and even experiments were taking place. This was what the royal workshop meant, and when Kang Go-han saw many types of weapons, he was confused, not knowing which one to choose. Then he overheard a conversation between a writer and the chief technical advisor, who suggested replacing the weapon, but the writer disagreed because the campaign was just around the corner. But Baron Harold Smith said that the instantaneous charge of magical power was so great that it was certain that with this weapon, he could subdue anyone. He added that the power would burst forth like the wind, strike like lightning, and rush by as fast as a ghost, and that this weapon was meant for strikers like him. His interlocutor said, apologetically, that he was truly sorry. But the Baron continued to insist on explaining everything. But the other man turned away and walked off. And the Baron, clutching his head, said that he wanted to conduct practical tests in the near future. Harold Smith was very angry. And then he noticed Kang Go-han and realized that he was a white. He started shouting about how newbies with the rank of white had gotten here and that they didn't belong here. He asked if Jackson had brought them and said that this was not a school, but Jackson asked him not to fuss and conveyed the order of the commander-in-chief. After reading the order, he realized that they were going to give equipment from the royal workshop to a bunch of kids who had just received the rank of white. The Baron did not understand how they had come to this and said that it was a disgrace to his gray head, adding that he had never seen anything like it before. Then Kang Go-han turned to the senior advisor, even though his friends tried to stop him. He asked to see the set of equipment he was talking about. He quoted his words about the enormous strain on the magical power of his special ability and that it was the perfect weapon for a striker. The elder thought that this guy, who couldn't even wield magical power, was talking nonsense. Turning away, he said that today was a terrible day and asked Jackson to remove these children from his sight. But Kang Go-han thought he couldn't miss this chance and that he would definitely get this set. He decided to use his magical power transformation. A whole day had passed since the battle with the goblins, so his condition had normalized, and he realized that he could do it twice. He called out to the Baron, who turned around and asked what he wanted and why he couldn't stop. The other riders watched them and discussed whether the white could use the transformation of magical power. Kang Go-han told the gentleman that he could rotate magical power and asked him to give him one chance. But the gentleman asked if he knew who he was trying to show off to, and how he dared to show his clumsy transformation of magical power. Looking at Kang Go-han, Jackson Silver realized that he had crossed the line and needed to fix it somehow. He told Kang Go-han that it was rude of him and ordered him to apologize immediately, then tried to grab him. But at that moment, Kaltz Black appeared and said that it was not necessary to touch the master carelessly.